So hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto was descendant of Ice Dragon Remnant and had Fem Dragon as his slave? Movie 2. Beacon Grimm Studies. Naruto would be the first to admit that had never been a model student. It was an outright miracle that had managed to graduate from the Shinobi Academy at all, and even after that had found he still had a difficult time when it came to mastering various forms of ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. That's not to say he hadn't put in the effort. Had spent countless hours outside of school applying himself, focusing on his own personal studies, and attempting to master even the most basic of shinobi skills. It had been a long and arduous road, one he later found out had been complicated by the existence of a tailed demon sealed within him. After discovering that little nugget of information, had found himself wondering just how differently life might have been for him, had the events that had taken his parents' lives away, and found him tied to the search fate of Kurama. It was pointless to complain about it now, but it was nonetheless something he occasionally reflected on. This was one of those times where he found himself with ample amounts of time to reflect on his current situation. Despite its name, Grimm Studies felt less like an in-depth look into the creatures of Grimm, what they were, and how they could be killed, and more like an hour where their instructor Professor Port, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and an eccentric ego to match, used the time to regale them with greatly exaggerated stories of his youth. It didn't take long for him to notice that such a thing must have been commonplace, as many of the older students were already fast asleep, no doubt having learned early on that the class could be conveniently utilized to catch up on lost sleep. Not everyone was asleep, however, as he could see that Blake had a copy of her own Grimm Studies textbook propped open, though this was mostly to hide the copy of Ninjas of Love she was currently reading, the title giving him the sneaking suspicion it was closely related to Kakashi-sensei's own make-out novels. Next to her, Yang was already fast asleep, her snores somehow not betraying her to their instructor. On either side of him, his partners, Weiss and Ruby, were busying themselves with their own tasks. To his astonishment, Weiss was somehow finding a way to glean notes from the lecture, while Ruby in contrast was doodling. "Kurama," he said, attempting to get the Nine-Tails' attention. His call was met with snoring and not from Yang. While he called exactly see him in his cell, Naruto assumed the moment he closed his eyes had fall asleep, he could hear the creature's distinctive snoring echoing from within. "Kurama," he said, again trying to rouse him. Snort, grumble, was all he heard in reply. "Kurama," he shouted. "What?" Naruto jumped in his seat, caught off guard by the tailed beast's snappy reply, and banging his knees on the underside of the desk as a result. His reaction didn't go unnoticed as Professor Port had ceased his lecture to regard the young man along with several other members of the class, including his teammates. While most people would have found the situation embarrassing, Naruto wasn't one of them. He was used to being stared at like this, as he often found himself in such situations back at the academy. As such, he had also developed a knack for getting out of them. Well, to be fair, it was somewhat successful, just not when Iruka-sensei was involved. "Is something the matter, my boy?" Professor Port asked, gazing at him with concern, or so he assumed. It was difficult to tell given how bushy the man's eyebrows were. "Not at all, sir," he replied, quickly formulating an excuse. "I was just so enamored by your story that I got excited and tried to leap out of my seat from all the excitement." Stares met him, the most notable coming from Weiss. His lackluster excuse didn't have any of them fooled, and a few people actually starting chuckling to themselves, expecting Port to call his bluff. "Splendid," Port cried, silencing much of the laughter and leaving them all dumbfounded. "It's always wonderful to hear that my experiences can still elicit feelings of excitement and determination from my students. Why, it's one of the core reasons behind my decision to leave the field and start shaping young minds. That said, I would ask that you try to keep such feelings contained. Save them for when we face the Grimm, for y'all need them more so than in here, my boy." "Of course, sir, sorry for the interruption." "Not at all. Now, where was I?" "Ah, yes," Port said, immediately picking up from where had left off. Breathing a sigh of relief, Naruto glanced around at those still looking at him. Several people were dumbfounded, having a difficult time figuring out just how had managed to evade its attention. A few of the older years gave him curt nods of acknowledgement, as if had passed some unwritten test and impressed them as a result. But the stares he was most curious about, his partners, were at the forefront. Weiss' jaw had hit her desk, broken through the surface, and continued on down to the floor. Ruby, in contrast, was grinning from ear to ear, obviously proud of what her partner had managed to accomplish. Even Yang and Blake looked impressed, the latter having actually put her book down to regard him. Once their attention returned to their previous tasks, however, Naruto rounded on Kurama. "Kurama, what the hell was that?" he snipped. "Hey, you deserve that. You should know better than to wake me from my nap," he countered. "That's all you do is nap," Naruto pointed out. "Not like I have much else to do." This cell didn't exactly come with an exercise room and entertainment center attached to it. Besides, listening to this guy droll on and on is enough to put the recently deceased out of their misery. "So, I'm guessing this guy is all hype and skill?" Naruto asked. He wasn't certain, but had heard it said once that those who can do, teach and port, seemed to be one of those individuals. "I won't say that," Kurama replied. I can definitely sense a great deal of power emanating from him. To be honest, I noticed it from several of the teachers already. It's different from how you shinobi feel, but if I were to compare them, most of these kids here are all on the same power level, with only one of you being significantly different. Who would that be? That Pyrrha girl, I think. The power I sense from her is definitely greater than her fellow students, at least twice as much. Still, she's significantly weaker than this poor guy. Naruto looked, giving the man a scrutinizing look. At first glance he didn't seem all that strong, but then again, that was a hallmark of a shinobi. Making themselves appear weaker, more off-balanced or unassuming, were all useful tools they utilized to throw their opponents off guard before taking advantage. Poor could possibly be the same way. His boisterous demeanor coupled with his appearance would no doubt leave many opponents skeptical of his abilities and skills. This was a huntsman academy, after all, so it would make sense that those who taught here had the knowledge, skills, and experience to back it up. Still, Naruto couldn't be quite certain of how true that statement really was. "Are you able to get in touch with Orochimaru?" he asked. "What do you take me for, a telephone operator?" Kurama snipped. "So, what can you or can't you? Just because he and I are both comprised of spiritual energy doesn't mean we can openly chat with one another, regardless of the distance between us. You did it before. Yay, because you had a physical connection to the sword, his conjured, or he was at least close enough for us to communicate with one another. Currently, the best I can do is tell you that has stowed away in your locker and dormant, like I would like to be right now." Fine, I was just curious," Naruto groused. "Well, once you actually have a physical connection, ask him his thoughts rather than interrupting me. Next time I won't stop at scaring you." I wasn't scared, I was surprised. Besides, what could you possibly do that would be worse? You remember the ordeal you were put through when you drank that expired milk after being made a part of Team 7? Naruto scrunched up his face, trying to recall what had happened. It was shortly after graduation and not long after they'd found out who their teams and instructors would be. Having been placed on the same team as Sakura had transformed himself into Sasuke, using the guise to get close to her and attempting to steal a kiss. Had been thwarted, however, when his stomach had rebelled and had found himself on the toilet soon after, suffering in ways he won't soon forget. "Yay, I remember," Naruto replied with a grimace. "Wake me again and it'll put you through something similar, but worse in ways you can't even begin to imagine." Naruto scoffed, assuming the Kyuubi was just making baseless threats, but he couldn't help the feeling of unease that followed. Kurama's chakra had a way of seeping out of him, especially when he was under great stress or pushed to the edge emotionally. Not only that, but because he was sealed within him, that meant they were technically the same being. All in all, it meant they shared the same experiences, and there was no telling just how much of his own body the Kyuubi was capable of manipulating. "Fine, but if it's an emergency you better not give me any flack. I can agree to those terms." "So, as impressive as it was to see you talk your way out of a detention, are you going to tell us what caused you to jump in your seat?" Yang asked as they walked down the hall towards combat class. "It's like I said, I got excited," Naruto said, knowing full well that the truth would sound ludicrous to them. "Yay, no. I know how boys get when they're excited. I happen to have a natural talent for that," she said with a sly smile, but what happened back there seemed more like surprise than excitement. As much as I hate to admit it, especially given the crass nature of Yang's explanation, that didn't seem at all like excitement. Weiss weighed in. "You're just jealous that boys find me physically attractive," Yang replied. "They'll have you know there were plenty of suitors vying for my affections back in Atlas. Were those affections genuine or did your daddy have to pay them to act like that?" Yang shot back. "Wow, how dare you. Girls, please, can we save the fighting for class?" Naruto wedged in, hoping to cut them off before they started yet another fight. "I suppose I must agree with my partner's guidance," she said. "A partner," Ruby corrected, earning a searing glare from the heiress that she simply shrugged off. "Seriously though, if something was wrong you'd tell us, right?" "Of course I would. There's really nothing you need to worry about," he assured her, though from the look he received she wasn't at all convinced. Truth of the matter was there wasn't much he could say that would be accepted by his teammates. Anything he confessed to them, from his origins to how he came to be in possession of Orochimaru to the fact that he shared a body with a demon in the guise of a nine-tailed fox, wouldn't be accepted without proof. Even if he had something to show for it, he wasn't quite sure they'd readily accept him afterwards. Even he would have had some misgivings about sharing a room with someone who was essentially harboring an uncontrollable beast inside him. "Hey, I resent that comment," Kurama complained. Though, and said creature was also privy to his innermost thoughts, which made things that much more complex. As it was, they were all making their way to combat class. As per the requirements of their lesson, they'd changed into their combat gear, and had also grabbed their weapons. With this being one of the first days of class, Miss Goodwitch intended to use their lesson to get a baseline of their abilities and skill, molding future lessons to fit with the needs of each student, as they were paired against an opponent that could challenge them. Oddly enough, Naruto felt better now that he had Orochimaru in hand, something might which have seemed odd at first, given that it meant having a total of 2 other voices in his head aside from his own. Still, the calm, collected nature of the spirit was a good contrast to Kurama, something which the young shinobi greatly appreciated. They took their seats in the stands, gazing down at the arena below. Just looking at it gave him flashbacks to the Chunin exams, a time in his life when had started to notice a change in his village, as had slowly but surely begun to become someone other than the demon child. He wondered idly to himself if this arena would prove to be the same, giving him an opportunity to set himself apart from the rest. Before long their sister team JNPR sat down beside them, each of the members giving them their own greeting with Pyrrha, obviously maintaining her polite visage. Naruto nodded back to her, idly wondering if she would maintain that same search persona even while in the spar. He won't know without fighting her, however, and instead turned his attention to the floor where Miss Goodwitch was going over the rules. They were the basic things, fights being ended either through yielding of an opponent or going into the red. Her strict tone as she almost threatened to enforce her rules, should anyone attempt to break them, gave him the impression she wasn't kidding around. Once she had laid down the ground rules, however, it was time to move on to the main event. Our first fight will be Pyrrha Echoes, she announced, to no one's surprise. Whispers and silent chuckles could be heard as people knew Goodwitch was starting things off with a show to set the bar, and that whomever was chosen as her opponent would no doubt be trounced. And her opponent will be Uzumaki Naruto. No sooner had the words left her mouth when Naruto felt everyone's eyes zero in on him, including Pyrrha's. While he was used to being the center of attention, the fact that it had happened to him twice in one day and in back-to-back classes no less was a little disconcerting. He glanced over at Pyrrha, receiving a polite "I'm sorry" shrug from the girl. He gave her a smile and polite nod in return, acknowledging the fact that this wasn't her fault. Knowing there was nothing he could do about his situation, he rose to his feet, Hyorin mirror in hand, and slowly made his way down the arena. "Go Naruto," Ruby cheered. 50 Lean says he kicks her ass, Yang replied. "Yang?" Ruby cried. "You're on," Nora replied. "Nora, please don't," Ren sighed. "There's little doubt that Pyrrha will win this bout, Weiss." "Weiss, you traitor. As our partner, we're supposed to root for him," Ruby snapped. "I'm not a traitor, I'm simply pointing out the obvious facts. Pyrrha is a 4-time tournament champion, and while I have great faith in Naruto's abilities, he doesn't have her level of skill. She'll defeat him just like she has every opponent before. There's a first time for everything, though," Ruby grumbled. Naruto stood on one side of the arena, facing Pyrrha who was on the other. Wearing his usual orange and black jumpsuit, he felt right at home in the clothes had worn for so many years. Being a shinobi, it was well known that having clothes which allowed for optimal movement were integral to their ability to carry out a mission. The same could be said of the huntsman life, as their ability to hunt and kill the grim required they wore clothing that allowed them to move freely without restricting their actions. He just wondered why they had to wear those awful school uniforms which were so restricting and itchy. "You ready to go Hyorin?" Naruto asking, his gazing never shifting to his opponent as he watched her stretch while they waited for Miss Goodwitch to prepare the arena. "I'm ready whenever you are, Naruto. A word of warning, your opponent is not someone to be taken lightly." "Yay, I know. Weiss gave me a lecture all about her exploits," Naruto groused. "It would seem she's more than just talk. I can sense a great deal of power coming from this young woman. I advise caution when fighting her. Best to feel it out before making any invested attacks," he advised. "They'll keep that in mind," Naruto replied, readying himself for the fight. "Are both combatants ready?" Miss Goodwitch asked aloud. Neither Pyrrha nor Naruto answered, instead choosing to silently nod their approval while maintaining their gaze. "Begin." The words had barely left Glinda's mouth when Pyrrha shot off like a bullet towards Naruto. The young shinobi noticed this immediately, instinct taking over as he drew Hyorin mirror to block her attack. He managed to bring it up just in time as the tip of her spear impacted the flat of the blade, preventing her from skewering him like a fish. She didn't let up, though, as she quickly shifted the spear into a sword form, using her shield to bat away his blade in the same movement, before unleashing a flurry of blows, all meant to keep him from retaliating. Naruto managed to parry most of them, receiving a few nicks here and there, when her blade found an opening to take advantage of. Up above the aura meter slowly depleted, reflecting the same damage Naruto was taking as he fought off Pyrrha. After a while there was a lull in her attacks, one which Naruto took without hesitation. A swift slash from Hyorin mirror was followed by a wave of ice that pushed the young girl back and away, giving himself a moment's respite. "Well, any doubts I might have had about her abilities have been retracted. This girl certainly lives up to the hype." "Indeed she does," Hyorin mirror commented. "I can't be certain, but I may have ascertained what her power, her semblance, is." "Really? What is it?" "I believe it may be magnetism," he replied. "Or at least some form of it. I'm not quite certain, but I noticed something emanating from her the moment she began her assault. Her movements were fast, but more so than is typically possible for a human. I believe that armor she wears is less for show and more to help her manipulate her movements. So, when Chess and Troubler wants to get the jump on you, then she uses her semblance to manipulate her armor, and therefore her body," Naruto concluded. "Precisely. I also noticed she attempted to do the same to me." "Really?" "Yes, though I only allowed her to have a small margin of search control. I could easily prevent her semblance from affecting me altogether, but, given the setting, I thought it best to at least let her maintain the illusion she has something of an edge over you. Ha, so if you are doing that then I'm guessing Kurama is the one messing with the aura meter. But he is, High Mare confirmed. How are you doing that, by the way? It's nothing overly complex. I'm just using your chakra to simulate aura just like the rest of these kids. Ha, really? Naruto asked, surprised. Yes, really. Yeah, I've spent so much time around these people, I've been able to gain something of a grasp on it. As far as they're concerned, you have aura same as the rest of them. Then you'd better lay off the jutsu, or my aura is going to drop fast, Naruto replied. Leave that to me. I won't give you complete use of my chakra, but if you let me know when you plan on using a jutsu, it'll give you a hand to ensure your aura doesn't take a hit. Thanks, I appreciate your help. While this lengthy conversation may have seemed to be going on for several minutes, the fact of the matter was it only lasted a few seconds. It ended at just the right moment too, as Pyrrha quickly sprang back into the fight, unleashing a flurry of blows onto Naruto. Instead of simply defending this time, he instead met her blow for blow, forcing her to have to either parry his attack or block it with her shield. The interesting thing was, rather than get frustrated by this, Pyrrha seemed to be enjoying it. The polite smile Shed worn quickly gave way to one that was genuine, and Naruto found himself starting to enjoy himself as well. There was just one problem he was having at the moment. Wow, look at them go, Ruby cooed, watching the fight with stars in her eyes. Looks like him going to win our bet, Nora said to Yang. What are you talking about? You're the one was going to fork over 50 lean, Yang shot back. That's so cool, I had no idea Naruto had this much skill, Ruby whispered to Weiss, ignoring the bickering that was breaking out next to her. Neither did I, the heiress confessed, staring at her partner in confusion. Up until now, Shed had no idea Naruto was capable of going toe-to-toe with Pyrrha. She figured she could be forgiven for having thought that. Pyrrha was, after all, a well-known tournament champion who had been featured on magazine covers, cereal boxes, and had been interviewed on several occasions. Naruto, on the other, was mostly an unknown. Aside from the incident in Mantle where had taken on and defeated a Goliath, she really didn't know much about his skills. Even when Shed had a chance to find out just how good he was, Shed immediately assumed he was yet another suitor attempting to get into her good graces by choosing an avenue the others hadn't before. Color her impressed to find he was nothing like them. What really struck her as odd, though, was the way the two were interacting in the fight. It didn't have anything to do with them holding back. It was obvious from the start that Pyrrha intended to do just that, and not long after she noticed the same thing was happening with Naruto. The two were on a completely different level, and they were slowly but surely warming up to the idea of taking off the restraints they placed on themselves, one at a time. No, what was odd about Naruto were his movements. They partially seemed like they were his own, and at the same time partially like they were someone else's. If one were to describe it was as if someone was controlling his movements, guiding him per se, and then in the next moment they were his own, completely natural as if had spent countless hours honing his skills. She brushed the feeling off, assuming it was just her imagination. Still, she couldn't help but wonder why someone with his skills had never been discovered until now. She's so slow, Naruto remarked. While that statement was mostly true, it wasn't completely correct when it came to defining what was happening between himself and Pyrrha. To everyone watching, the speed at which he and Pyrrha were sparring was incredibly fast. Had anyone else been fighting her, they might have been overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity and relentlessness of her attacks. The fact that Naruto was able to keep up with her and even match her speed was simply a testament to the training he had undergone. Being a shinobi, speed was paramount to achieving victory. Being able to quickly infiltrate enemy territory without being noticed, escaping before they had time to react to your presence, and even being able to perform jutsu signs before an opponent could react or counter them, often meant the difference between life and death. However, Naruto had the distinct feeling that such wasn't the case here. While he knew for a fact he had a decent reaction time, the fact that he could easily keep up with Pyrrha was a bit difficult for even him to believe. Hey, High are you augmenting my movements or something? If you are asking me if I'm doing something to help you keep up with the young woman, then yes, but only just. I'm merely adding to your overall skill set, not fighting your battles for you, so you'd better not assume you can rely on my power to get you through all of your fights. Wouldn't dream of it. As they were talking, Naruto and Pyrrha had been circling each other around the arena. 10 minutes had already elapsed in the spar, but it somehow felt longer and more exciting. He could tell from their aura meters that they needed to end this soon, and Naruto had already devised a way in which he might be able to end things quickly. However, I've got a plan on how we can end this, but it'll need your help to pull it off. I'll help where I can. What did you have in mind? Having chosen a strategy of her own, Pyrrha once more shot towards her opponent. Naruto saw her coming and, with a swipe of his katana, sent a wave of ice over the area floor. Rather than targeting Pyrrha herself, he instead targeted the floor, covering it in a thin sheet of ice that would make it difficult for her to traverse. Pyrrha continued on unimpeded, though, as her semblance allowed her to maintain her balance despite the treacherous terrain. Naruto didn't seem at all perturbed by this, however. In fact, he seemed almost pleased. She wouldn't understand why until he brought the tip of his katana straight down onto the ice. In the next moment the ice itself melted before a wave of mist erupted from the ground. She came to an immediate halt, unable to see very far in the thick fog that surrounded him. It was a clever ploy, one that she hadn't seen used before, but would undoubtedly look out for in the future. Now on to phase 2, Naruto said to himself, bring his hands up to make a cross sign with his finger as he spoke. Pyrrha moved cautiously through the mist, her shield held at the ready for any surprise attacks and her weapon in its spear form, ready to skewer her opponent when she next caught sight of him. Typically, a tactic such as this, while unorthodox, wouldn't be as advantageous as someone might think. Typical mist didn't obscure a person's vision very much. A few feet outside their normal vision, but even then it didn't provide much of an advantage. It was, after all, just water, and water had a tendency to flow around objects and get absorbed by them. What's more, the environmental features would usually have cleared most of this way. While the arena was closed off with a barrier to prevent stray bullets and debris from hitting the audience, it could just as easily clear away this mist. Funnily enough, it was sticking around and was as thick as pea soup. Pyrrha figured it must have something to do with the type of dust had used. While she didn't use dust, aside from her bullets, she was fairly certain ice dust didn't have this sort of lingering effect. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of movement, and she quickly turned to face it. A wall of mist greeted her, and she strained her ears, hoping to pick him out from his footfalls before he could attack. She quickly realized that wouldn't be the case, as a dark shape could be seen making its way through the wall of fog. Brandishing his katana, Naruto leapt out at her, but Pyrrha was ready. Deflecting the blow aside with her shield, she quickly countered with a thrust to his chest. Naruto was thrown back into the mist, but for a moment she could have sworn she'd seen a puff of smoke after he landed. She quickly moved to overtake him, but found he was already gone, having managed to recover and disappear back into his cover. I must admit, this is a clever tactic. Most opponents would have thought to use something like this, she said, glancing around. Given that most tournaments are held in open-air stadiums, I wouldn't imagine this being very effective, she heard him say, turning her body to face the direction of his voice when he spoke. Indeed, it would have dispersed by now. Is it some new form of dust? Something like that, he admitted. It's very useful for taking your opponents by surprise, she said, drawing closer to where she thought he was. True, he said. At that moment she felt something tickle the side of her face, and she glanced over only to see the sharp blade of his katana sitting next to her. Too close for her to react, she felt him lean near closer before saying, especially when they think they have the drop on you. In the next moment the mist dissipated and their reveal was accompanied by sharp gasps and murmurs. Naturally, no one had expected Naruto to come out on top, especially against someone like Pyrrha. She hadn't expected it either, but somehow this felt less like a loss to her. If anything, it felt liberating. Having her first spar against an opponent watch she'd greatly underestimated and rendered her first lose in a while was quite satisfying. It would certainly go a long way to putting to rest the talks of her being the invincible girl for one. We should probably end this, Naruto said. Indeed, she agreed. I forfeit, he announced. To say everyone was dumbstruck by this statement would have been an understatement. Pyrrha herself was so taken aback that she whipped around to look him in the face, just to make sure she'd heard him correctly. Unfortunately, she'd forgotten about the katana blade that was almost kissing her neck and soon found she'd sliced her neck along its edge when her aura flared from the exposure. Despite her hope that Naruto had been pulling her leg, she could see from his expression that he was indeed serious about forfeiting the match to her. Mr. Uzumaki, I must admit, I'm rather surprised that you would forfeit the match, especially when you had a clear advantage. Care to explain your reasoning? Miss Goodwitch inquired. I didn't cause Pyrrha any undue harm, he replied. Snickers and chuckles could be heard from the audience. Even Pyrrha felt a little annoyed, finding his explanation to be more of a manner of mocking her, rather than giving an actual reason. Care to elaborate? My skills with my family's sword are such that I'm well suited to taking on large groups of enemies, and acting as crowd search control. However, when facing off against a single opponent, unless I'm absolutely certain that I won't harm any innocent bystanders or don't have to worry about collateral damage, my skill set is fairly limited as a result, and given that we're fighting one-on-one in an enclosed space, I was fairly certain one of my more destructive attacks would have done more damage than it intended. I see, Miss Goodwitch said, making a note on her scroll pad. That is an acceptable answer, thank you. I'll trust that y'all endeavor to remedy this weakness in the future. You won't have many opportunities in my spars to face off against opponents who are willing to respect your boundaries. Noted, he replied. As for you Miss Nekos, I would advise that you be more mindful of your opponent's overall skills and abilities. While you may have been a prodigy in the tournament scene, y'all find your fellow students are not constrained by the same rules you were, as Mr. Uzumaki demonstrated when he used that fog to conceal his movements. They'll be sure to learn from this experience, Pyrrha replied, somewhat glad to have an assessment that wasn't all praise. Very well, take your seats. Our next round of combatants will be as follows, she announced. Naruto returned to his seat, ignoring the overall looks and comments from the other students as he reached his team. He glanced over at Pyrrha, giving the girl a warm smile which she returned. Her smile, however, seemed rather forced, and he got the impression that she was rather annoyed by something. What was that? He said, looking over at Weiss, who was giving him a critical look. What was what? That. You had the fight in hand and yet you forfeited at the end. Why? It's like I said, my skills are too overpowered to be used in a one-on-one setting. A lot could go wrong, so I opted for the safer route instead. She mumbled, staring at him intently as if she were trying to discern if he was lying or not. Look, if you are still not convinced, we'll do some training as a team this weekend at the Emerald Forest. It'll show you how destructive my abilities can be. Very well, she said, satisfied with his answer. It'll be holding you to that. The rest of their day went fairly smoothly after that. The spars that followed were fairly interesting aside from the match that included John Ark, Pyrrha's partner, and Cardin Winchester, the leader of Team CRDL. To say that the match had been one-sided would have been an understatement. It was obvious that Cardin held the advantage, with John doing everything he could to try and stave off the attacks or simply survive. At the end of it he was given some rather harsh criticism by Miss Goodwitch, before being sent back to his team with a rather dejected look on his face. All the while Pyrrha sent him awkward glances, telling him that she still felt bothered by their spar. He didn't pay much attention, though. He was more concerned with his connection to Hyour and Meru, and the fact that he was able to give him such an obvious advantage, at least to him, in their spar. While Had normally find this a boon, he wasn't one to take the easy way simply to achieve victory. All the obstacles Had overcome, the distance Had brought himself to, had been accomplished through hard work and training. Sure, his shadow clone jutsu helped him to gain experience quicker, and thus could be seen as something of a shortcut at times, but all the work Had accomplished up to that point had been his own. It was because of this that he found himself secluded on Beacon's roof, holding Hyour and Meru in his hands as they discussed the connection fate made. So, tell me, have you always been able to increase my abilities like that, or was this a recent development? I won't call it recent. Well, I wasn't able to do this in the beginning. Over time our connection to one another grew stronger, and with it my ability to increase your own abilities through my own manipulation. Then the simple fact that we've been together was all it took to put me on the same level as Pyrrha. Naruto concluded. Not exactly. Well, simply being within one another's vicinity allowed us to establish a connection. The simple fact of the matter is that it required much more effort on your part for me to create a tangible link that enabled me to lend my strength to you. I'm not sure I understand. Tell me, Naruto, as a shinobi, did you find you were capable of performing the same techniques as your peers, simply by viewing them or being around the tools that enabled them to accomplish their mission? Of course not. I had to really work hard just to keep up with everyone, he admitted. Had the same trouble when learning how to perform the jutsu that allowed him to walk up the side of trees. Had spent a good afternoon landing on the back of his head, before Had finally asked Sakura for some advice. Indeed. Well, my presence is all that's required to create a connection between the two of us. In order for me to gain greater search control, and thus offer a greater portion of my power to you, I required you to train and hone your skills. By doing that we were able to strengthen our bond, ensuring that I could give you greater aid when needed. I see. So all that training we did while living in Raven's camp was meant to do more than simply teach me how to manipulate Rishi, Naruto realized. Exactly. Well, I do intend for you to gain a greater mastery over those abilities, and thus increase your overall skills and ability to rely on your own strength. I also felt it was necessary to strengthen our bond as well, should you find yourself in a situation where my interference would be necessary. Understand, however, that I will only lend you my aid when I feel it is needed, not simply because you desire it. I think I understand, Naruto replied. Though, to be honest, your interference during the spar may have made things that much more difficult for me. Goodwitch probably thinks I have the skills to hold my own against Pyrrha. Knowing that she's probably going to become a regular opponent for me in the arena. Perhaps. Perhaps not. What do you mean? The connection you and I have established also allows me to see into your memories. I've gleaned a great deal of knowledge about you, including your work ethic. I'm glad to see you are not one to slacken their training. While you may have some difficulty handling the power you now wield, in time you will gain a greater grasp on it, and require my interference less and less. Wow, that's cool, though a bit disturbing, Naruto said, wondering just how many of his memories he had actually seen. Why can't you just take search control all the time? You know, autopilot or something like that. You mean use you like a puppet? Hyour and Meru asked. I could, it won't be difficult, but certainly not something that I would recommend doing. How come? Do you recall the few times Kurama's chakra leaked out and overtook you? The question, while seeming odd, caused Naruto to reflect on the few times it had happened. At best he remembered how overcome with rage had been at the time, and the innate desire had to kill whomever had wronged him or his friends. It hadn't been a pleasant experience, especially considering his body had paid the price for it in the aftermath, but all in all it had helped him at the time. Yay, I remember. What you were probably unaware was the toll it was taking on your body, Hyour and Meru pointed out. Well, you were sore after the incident, allowing Kurama's immense chakra to overwhelm your body, was taking its toll on you in ways you won't be able to physically see. To put it in layman's terms, the act itself was causing you more harm than good. Really? Indeed. While the earlier incidents were minimal in their damage, had more of his chakra leaked out, there was a good chance you'd start to notice lasting effects. Before long it might have killed you. That statement got Naruto's attention. So, does that mean our connection could have the same effects? If you were to allow me to take full search control, yes. The sword itself, while acting as a conduit, also enables me to establish a connection and regulate how much of my power you wield. With time and training you'll begin to gain access to more and more of my powers, until you reach a point where you can wield it completely, unimpeded by any detrimental effects. However, if I were to take over and use my power unimpeded, it'd all but destroy you as a result. That, of course, would be just as bad for me as it is for you. I see. Then it's a good thing we spent so much time training before coming here. Indeed, and, as you pointed out to your partner, y'all need to do more training to ensure you don't overcompensate with your attacks. Unleashing immense amounts of energy into a single attack is easy. Honing it into a fine edge where only a certain amount is expended against a single opponent is the difficult part. No kidding, Naruto agreed, reflecting on everything they just discussed. We'll continue this conversation another time. It appears you have a guest. Before he could ask who it was, Hyorin Maru cut their connection and went dormant. His mind quickly returned to the rooftop where the night sky above and the cityscape down below could be clearly seen. Considering that only his team members knew he was up here, he figured it must be either Weiss or Ruby Watt come to see him, no doubt looking for a way to monopolize some time with their partner. He was understandably surprised when he turned around and instead saw Pyrrha standing in the doorway. I hope I'm not disturbing you, she said. Not at all, he replied, shifting so he was in a sitting position rather than a lotus stance. Something you wanted to talk about? Well, yes, actually. When I came by your dorm your teammates told me you'd gone up to the roof, she replied, answering one question he had. I have a few questions for you, Naruto, and I'd appreciate it if you answered me honestly. Of course, he said, waiting for her to ask her question. She didn't ask right away. She stared at him for a long moment, studying him. He looked back at her curiously, wondering when she was going to ask her question, or if she'd somehow forgotten. Patience hadn't always been his strongest trait, and sadly his attention span was beginning to wane. Pyrrha must have found what she was looking for, however, as she took a breath and asked, "Our spar this afternoon, did you forfeit on purpose?" Naruto stared back at her, visibly confused by the question. Did she think had not been serious when had given in? He didn't think she did. Had explained his reasons why shortly after to Miss Goodwitch, so there shouldn't be any confusion about his intentions. Still, he wasn't certain that was what she was getting at. Could you elaborate? I'm not quite sure I know what it is you're asking. Oh, yes, I can see how you might be confused, she replied. Did someone ask you to throw the match or threaten you in any way if you didn't? Naruto's eyebrows rose, realizing exactly what she meant. She was asking if had purposely given up to make her look good. No, he replied flatly. Everything I told Miss Goodwitch is the truth. No one put me up to it or asked me to lose or made any threats. Would have been hard given the fact that the matches are all random, or at least to the extent that only Miss Goodwitch had any idea who would be fighting him. True, you have a point there, she replied, visibly embarrassed by the conversation at this point. I take it that's happened on more than one occasion, he concluded. Unfortunately yes, it has, she replied. You want to talk about it? He asked, patting the spot next to him on the roof. She glanced at the spot and then back up at him. Giving her a warm smile, she returned the gesture and went to sit down on the roof with him. I take it this has something to do with your title of the Invincible Girl? He asked, glancing over at her. I see I've heard about that, she remarked with a wince. Weiss gave me a lecture not long after we became partners. She was rather scandalized by the fact that I had no idea who you were, despite having come from Mistral. Honestly, I never cared for the popular people. Never really understood what all the fuss was about anyway. I'm glad to hear that, she said, smirking in spite of herself. Meeting people who think that way is one of the reasons I came to Beacon. Oh? Back home, I was placed on a pedestal. From the moment I became a competitive fighter I was seen as untouchable, in more ways than one. People who claimed I was their friend only sought to use my fame for their own gain, and people I wanted to be friends with saw me as someone too far above them to be considered worthy. On more than one occasion I wanted to just take all the fame and notoriety it accumulated and cast it aside. I wanted to be normal for once. So why didn't you? Because it was impossible. Because no one would believe me. Because my every move would have been questioned, scrutinized, and over-exaggerated to either mean something outlandish and completely off the mark. The list goes on and on. I had very few options, if any. Beacon was one of the few I felt was marginally possible. And then we sparred, Naruto said, putting the pieces together. And then we sparred, she agreed. I have to admit, your forfeit was so out of left field that I started wondering if someone had paid you off or threatened you in some way. I take it that's happened in the past. More than you think. Anytime I've found myself facing off against a challenging opponent, I've heard of them being sent death threats by fans, or offered large sums of money by sponsors, all in an attempt to get them to forfeit or throw the match entirely. I can see how you would think that of me, he admitted. I can honestly say, though, that none of those were what happened today. I haven't been using my family's sword for very long, but I learned early on just how powerful it can be. Out in the middle of nowhere, facing down Grim, it's easy for me to simply unleash its destructive power without any thought to the consequences. In a closed ring, however, one-on-one and with an audience, I found it much more difficult to keep that power contained. You say that, but I remember you managing to keep up with me in that fight of ours. Not many people are able to do that, she pointed out. That's because I had a good teacher, one who showed me how to properly wield this type of weapon, and before that I was given some specialized training, ever since I was little. Combine all of that, and I was able to hold my own, at least for a little while. I ended up having to even things out when I initiated that smokescreen. Yes, that was a clever tactic, she said, thinking back on it. Her eyebrows furrowed as she remembered something, and she fixed him with a questioning gaze. During that fight, I remember striking you in the chest, only to have you come up from behind a moment later. Was that really you, or was I imagining things? No, I remember that as well, he said, rubbing the area on his chest where Shed skewered him. You made it pretty clear that a frontal attack was the wrong idea. Besides, if you still don't believe me, I did promise to show you all this weekend in the Emerald Forest. I suppose, and I will be holding you to that, she said, still unsure of what Shed's seen. Well, I should probably go. I didn't expect to have to hunt you down just to talk. My team will no doubt be wondering where I am. And I should get back before Yang starts coming up with theories of her own. Knowing her, she'll use it to rile up Weiss and Ruby, and then you'll really be in trouble. I must admit, you are in a really unique situation, she commented with a laugh. Unique? Try torturous. Neither one of them is difficult enough, but dealing with them both is going to lead me to leaping out the window just to escape their arguing. Pyrrha laughed at that, biting him goodbye. He waited a few minutes for her to be out of sight before beginning the journey back. He could already feel Kurama's presence as he waited for an opportune moment to butt in with his own opinion. You keep making promises like that, kid, and pretty soon you're going to owe people more favors than you can keep track of. It's 2 promises, one to Sakura and the other to Pyrrha. That's not a whole lot to keep track of, he pointed out. Don't forget you promised to find a way to get us home, and you made the same promise to Pyrrha as you did the girls, he countered. That's only 3. The last one counts as the same thing, he argued. Maybe to you it does, Kurama said with a huff. Naruto didn't answer. He knew what Kurama was getting at. Well, he was starting to enjoy himself, things were starting to get complicated. He had a mission, a goal, and sooner or later he would have to end up leaving all of this behind. Still, that didn't mean he could leave things on good terms. Even if it was only for a few years, had at least make sure to fulfill any promises he made and see to it that his friends had only good memories of him to look back on. That was his shinobi way, after all, and nothing was going to stop him from keeping it. Beacon Academy Emerald Force. Early in the morning, while most of Beacon still slept, teams NWBYR and JNPR made their way through the Emerald Forest. Most of their members, namely Nora and Yang, were still groggy as they'd expected to spend the morning sleeping in as was expected from a Saturday. Unfortunately for them, Naruto had informed them that he would be doing a demonstration for Pyrrha early that morning, and anyone who wanted to join them was welcome to tag along. Weiss had agreed almost instantly, and Ruby had been quick to agree as well, so as not to allow her partner rival to gain the upper hand. Yang had decided to come too, which led to Blake being coerced into joining the team in their entirety. As soon as the morning had approached, however, they immediately regretted their decision. The sisters were especially crabby as they'd been up all night playing video games, while Naruto and Weiss had gone to bed early to avoid being too tired. It seemed Pyrrha's team had been in the same boat as well. When asked why they were out in the forest at the crack of dawn, Naruto's answer had been a simple one. With autumn fast approaching, the mornings were becoming chilly. That meant they could see their breath on occasion, and the cold weather further aided Naruto's ability to utilize high Rinris abilities. This wasn't completely off the mark, though his teammates took his explanation to mean that the cold weather somehow enhanced the dust-infused properties of the blade. In truth, Hyorin Maru had informed him that elemental blades such as himself often thrived off of environments centered around their own element. In basic terms, because the air and weather in general was becoming colder, Hyorin Maru was able to utilize the environment itself to power his attacks without tapping into his Reishi. This further worked to his advantage as his own reserves would see little use, enabling him to battle longer, and even utilize stronger attacks more often. On the opposite side, if the environment was more in line with the desert, then he would have to be more tactical with his attacks, and watch how much of his Reishi he used. This was something Naruto had found was quite true, especially while traveling through Atlas. Being an almost perpetually snow and ice-covered landscape, Naruto found no problems utilizing Hyorin Maru to his fullest potential. It was one of the reasons he was able to fight off the horde of Grimm and kill the Goliath so easily, as well as assist Ruby when had met her in Vale. Bottom line, cold weather was good, hot weather was bad. How much further? Nora whined. We just need to find some Grimm. It shouldn't be long now, Naruto said. Had Kurama helping him in that regard, searching out the nearest group to make this excursion quicker for them. But I'm so cold and tired and sleepy and hungry, she continued. I told you to bring a coat, her partner Ren chided. Pyrrha didn't bring a coat, she pointed out. I've trained in extreme weather so this isn't a big deal for me, the champion pointed out. John? She asked, looking for some sympathy from her leader. Nor, you know I wear a hoodie under my armor, right? He asked. Nora groaned loudly, rubbing her arms furiously to try and warm herself. Naruto chuckled, more amused than annoyed with the girl. I don't know why you're complaining, you didn't have to tag along. Naruto only invited Pyrrha to come to demonstrate his abilities, Weiss pointed out. But their fight was so cool and we didn't see a whole lot because of that smoke screen he put up, she said. It was actually mist, Naruto corrected. Which you used as a smoke screen, Nora countered. I want to see what you can really do for when we fight. Nor, there's no guarantee Miss Goodwitch will pit you and Naruto against one another, Ren stated. Of course she will. How could she not? She asked. Alright, we have a pack of beelds nearby. Everyone get ready. It'll take point. You all should stand back, I don't want you in my line of fire. Everyone did as they were told, forming a wall behind him. While many of them looked around with confused faces, wondering how he knew there were Grimm nearby, they nonetheless deployed their weapons just in case. Naruto took hold of Orochimaru, readying himself for what was to come. The Grimm were drawn close and there were quite a few of them. That was perfect. The more that came the better the demonstration. He just hoped he would prove capable of handling them all. Just concentrate. Trust in your abilities and they'll prove true, Rinra's voice said to him. Naruto nodded slightly, more so for himself than anyone else. Before long the growls and howling of wolves could be heard, and everyone dropped into a ready position. Naruto's muscles tightened, his focus set on the tree line, as he waited for the first of them to break through. He saw their crimson eyes piercing through the tree line before their white bone masks and pitch black fur. There were a few dozen of them in all, not too much for himself and his team to handle, but just enough to pose a challenge if they didn't take things seriously. Amongst them he could see what appeared to be an alpha hanging back behind the juveniles. It was a smart and clever tactic, though one that would ultimately prove futile the moment they attacked. As expected, the younger ones rushed forward, instinct telling them to use their overwhelming numbers to overtake the teens. It proved useless against him. Rise over the frosted heavens, Orochimaru. As he spoke the words he drew Orochimaru from its sheath. A wave of cold frigid air erupted out with it, sweeping across the forest floor and towards the advancing beels. The Grimm paid little attention to the forceful winds and ice that battered against them. Had they been smarter they might have noticed they were being frozen in place. With little regard for their own safety, they continued to press forward until they could no longer move at all. In just a few seconds a wall of ice standing just a few feet away from Naruto and running as far back as the tree line shone brilliantly in the dawn of the morning sun. The ice was completely transparent, allowing everyone to get a good look at the beelds frozen mid-step, some on their hind legs, while others were on all fours, snarling as they raced towards their prey. None of the Grimm had managed to avoid the attack, not even the alpha. They were all perfectly preserved like insects frozen in fossilized amber. Well, I'm convinced, Yang said, letting out an impressed whistle at the sight. You weren't kidding when you said your attacks had a large area of effect, Pyrrha agreed, her eyes wide in astonishment. I'm still working on making them less volatile. It helps against large groups so long as none of my teammates are in my line of fire. I must admit, that is quite impressive, Weiss must. I wonder how they managed to infuse so much dust into the blade to allow such a massive attack. A question for another day, he replied. For now, though, let's get to the fun part. Nora, would you like to do the honors? With pleasure, the young Redeed said. Extracting her weapon from her back, Nora shot off 3 quick shots high into the air. Pink smoke trailed behind them as they descended down to their immobile targets and exploded upon impact. The ice shattered into thousands of tiny flecks of ice, and sounded like shattering glass as they went. Wisps of smoke soon followed after, the telltale sign that the Grimm were dead, and once the mist had cleared, they could see that not a single Beelf had been left alive. So, he said, turning to regard his audience, was hungry. To say that his team had been impressed with his power would have been an understatement. Ruby all but gushed about how up his abilities had been, and even Pyrrha, who had been sporting a rather doubtful expression, ever since their spar, had begun to show a newfound respect for her opponent. Not only was it clear that his skills were enough to pose a significant challenge to her, but, should fate ever find them sparring or facing off in a manner that ensured there would be no collateral damage, she was certain had quickly gained the upper hand. As for the others, it was clear whatever respect and admiration they'd had for him before had grown a great deal. Weiss was especially curious about how Orochimaru had been crafted, and if such techniques could be used today, assuming any record of them still existed. Naruto wasn't too worried about this train of thought. From what he knew of Orochimaru, the process which created him was something beyond a human's ability to understand. Not only that, but any attempts made by Weiss to inquire about more information were easily shot down. By simply stating that the katana was the only thing he had left of his family, and that any records pertaining to his existence or creation had been lost, he was able to slip out of her grasp. Even Pyrrha found it doubtful that anything could be learned about High or Naru, as such a weapon or weapons like it would have undoubtedly found their way into Mistral's culture and the many myths they passed down through the ages. Their line of questioning followed them through to the next school week and continued on through breakfast. Naruto had quickly grown used to their chatter enough that he could tune it out somewhat. That was probably why he heard the cries of pain so distinctly. He paused, looking up from his meal to see a group of boys sitting at a table and around a young woman with rabbit ears coming out of her head. The bigger, brawnier one of the boys had one of her ears in a firm grip and was tugging it on it, laughing all the while as his teammates egged him on. "They're at it again," Ren pointed out, obviously having seen the same sight. "How disgusting." "Yeah, I'd think with this being a Huntsman Academy they'd know better." "Yeah, I'd think, but racism is everywhere. The only good thing is that foreigners are treated better here than other parts of Remnant." "Most of the time," Blake pointed out. "Should we maybe get a teacher to have them put a stop to this?" Ruby asked. "By the time they got here class will have started." "There's not much anyone can do," Pyrrha replied. "Somebody should do something though," Naruto thought to himself. Seeing the young woman being picked on while others just stood around and watched had him drifting back to memories of his childhood. Those had been rough days for him. He didn't know then what he knew now, and that made things all the worse for him. Being attacked, run out of shops, and called a demon child with no real context to go off of. The one thing that stood out to him was how everyone looked at him back then. They looked at him like he was diseased, a parasite to be avoided. Even after all these years, after had earned his village's respect, those early memories still stung in ways he couldn't quite describe. Without a word he rose from his seat and began making his way over. His teammates took notice, saying something he couldn't quite make out. It didn't matter. All he saw was the image of himself as a child, dirty, crying, alone. How he had wished for someone, anyone to stand up for him, to lend him a helping hand when he needed it most. How difficult it had been to come to terms with the fact that he could count on no one else but himself. "Naruto. Hey Naruto." Kurama was yelling in his ears. "What are you doing? This isn't your fight." "Don't worry, I'm just going over to have a friendly chat, that's all," he assured him. "Fine friendly," Kurama said. "I wouldn't be the one to start the fight," he said, "but I'll damn well finish it." By the time had made it over to their table several pairs of eyes, not all of them his friends, were watching him in anticipation. Muttered conversations could be heard as people either speculated on what would happen or started taking down bets. It took a moment for the boy to register that Naruto was standing right next to him, and by then he was looming over him. "What do you want, Fronis freak?" they asked dismissively. "Fronis freak?" Naruto asked. "That is what you are. Did you forgot about those ugly whiskers on your face?" Reflexively, Naruto's hand drifted to his face, touching the 3 sets of birthmarks that lined his cheeks. They were one of the more subtle clues to his identity as the vessel for the 9-tailed fox. Here, though, they apparently marked him as a Fronis, a detail that didn't faze him much given his earlier experiences. "I must admit I've been called many things, but Fronis freak is a new one." "Great, so what do you want?" he asked, perturbed. "Well, seeing as how you asked so nicely, I want you to let that young woman go," he said. "Now. And if I don't?" the boy asked, rising to his seat so he could better glare into Naruto's eyes. Without a word he smirked, reaching out faster than he could react and took hold of his wrist. Pressing firmly into a pair of pressure points he heard the boy cry out before he twisted. All at once his grip failed him, and the young woman found herself freed from his grasp. Not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, she quickly gathered up her tray and bolted. None of the other boys made a move to stop her. Their attention was firmly on that of Naruto's, and the pleased smirk he was sporting. His attention no longer on the girl, the behemoth snarled as he massaged his wrist and glared down at Naruto. Sensing the escalating situation, his teammates rose from their seats and surrounded him on all sides, closing him in. All the while Naruto's smirk never faltered. Had faced far worse odds before and come out on top. Had faced off against shinobi far stronger than him, and Jinchuriki such as himself, and still managed to walk away from fights that had all but ensured he would be left cold and dead on the ground. Being surrounded by 4 boys whose biggest accomplishment was harassing people weaker than them wasn't intimidating, it was downright laughable. "You think this is funny?" "Not really. Honestly, I find it rather pathetic," he replied. "Pathetic? Yay, you and your boys, picking on people who you see as weaker than yourself. It's pathetic. You're supposed to be huntsmen in training, but the way you're all acting makes it look like an absolute joke. Is that so? Well, we'll see who the joke's on when we pummel your face into the floor," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Really? 4 against 1. You honestly think that'll be enough?" Naruto asked sincerely. "Of course it'll be enough. You're here all alone." Who said anything about him being alone? Yang's voice came through clear enough for him to denote that she was nearby, no doubt standing outside the ring of boys. Turning with the rest of them, Naruto's grin grew as he saw it wasn't just Yang standing with him. Having made a semicircle around the group of bullies, the combined numbers of both his team as well as their sister team outnumbered them 2 to 1. The confident bravado the blonde once held had quickly evaporated as he was made to face the fact that he no longer held the advantage. "Mind if I tag in?" Yang asked, cracking her knuckles and earning a much more visual confirmation of her intimidation factor than the blonde had. The bullies looked between one another, exchanging nervous looks. They hadn't counted on fighting Naruto's entire team, let alone Yang. They'd seen what she could do in the sparring ring. Add to that the group also included Pyrrha, a girl who was nigh unbeatable, and they were guaranteed to end up in the med bay after. They expelled a visible sigh of relief when the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the 10 minutes they had to get to their next class. All at once the cafeteria began to disperse, including the blonde as his cohorts. "We'll finish this later, funnest freak," he said, slamming his shoulder into Naruto's as he left. The act of aggression had little effect as Naruto seamlessly moved with the shoulder, but the message was clear. "That was pretty ballsy of you, standing up to them," Yang praised. "That was so awesome. I can't believe I have such a cool partner." "I wonder why he called you a funnest freak though," Ren commented. "He thought my cheek marks were whiskers." "Honestly, not the first time someone made that mistake." "What are they then?" Pyrrha asked. "Birthmarks," he replied, his answer not completely true but not wholly inaccurate. "Regardless, you shouldn't have interfered." "What if he had attacked you?" Weiss asked. "Then I would have defended myself," he answered easily. "Yay, duh," Weiss screamed. "Didn't you see his spar with Pyrrha? Has more than capable of defending himself." "That's not what has me so worried," she replied. "He could have gotten a detention and for defending a furnace no less." "What point are you trying to make?" Blake asked indignantly, glaring at the white-haired girl. "The point is he shouldn't have interfered. That girl's a huntress in training, same as us. She should have been more than capable of defending herself. Maybe she didn't because she knew it would only cause trouble for the other furnace by acting out," Blake argued. "That doesn't mean he needed to interfere. They're her problem, not ours," Weiss argued back. "Weiss," Naruto said, stepping in before their argument could escalate. "Let me ask you this. Would you have felt any different if I really was a furnace and still acted in her defense?" Well, she hesitated, suddenly feeling everyone's eyes on her. She quickly shut her mouth, knowing full well that anything she said could be used to contradict how she had acted up to that point. "Look, fact of the matter is, if I see someone in need of help, I will act in their defense, human or furnace, it doesn't matter. That's simply my ninja way." "You what?" Yang asked, cocking an eyebrow. "My huntsman way," he quickly corrected. As luck would have it, their next class for the day was combat training. This unfortunate portion in their scheduling had taught many of the teams to eat light, so as not to find themselves incapacitated by their stomachs as they roiled and groaned. If that hadn't been their first warning, then the first students to take an attack to their gut and subsequently puke all over the area certainly did, especially when they were made to stay behind to clean it up. Naruto, of course, never had this problem. Life as a shinobi had come with the lesson of eating nutritious meals and always being prepared for a fight, which meant ensuring whatever you ate won't become a detriment later on. There was the one time after they graduated, but that had been a fluke. He was sure that milk had still been good when he drank it. "Alright, for our first match, Cardin Winchester," Miss Goodwitch announced. Cardin, who Naruto immediately recognized to be the bully from the lunchroom, stood up. Wearing heavy-looking armor with what he assumed was a cardinal on the chest plate, he hefted his mace over his shoulder before descending to the arena below. On his way down he caught sight of Naruto and gave him a sneer, one that made it very clear what he thought of him. Naruto rolled his eyes. He wasn't the first bully had put in his place, and he won't be the last. "Now then, for your opponent, Welljaw. I'd like to challenge Naruto Uzumaki," Cardin announced. A soft murmur of voices resonated throughout the stands. Naruto cocked an eyebrow, surprised by the challenge, but not at all averse to it. Truth be told, had been hoping Cardin would throw a punch back in the cafeteria, just so he could have an excuse to let off a little stress. It seemed now he would get his chance. "Very well. I had something else planned, but if Mr. Uzumaki accepts," Miss Goodwitch began. "I accept," Naruto replied, standing from his seat to make his way down to the arena. The murmurs increased, tinged with excitement as students began taking bets on who would win. More than a few had their money on Naruto given his last fight with Pyrrha that more or less ended in a draw. Still, more than a few had their bets on Cardin, as they felt his fight with the invincible girl had all been for show. Cardin obviously felt the same if the arrogant smirk he displayed was anything to go by. The match will be between Cardin Winchester and Uzumaki Naruto. The match ends when one of your aura reaches the red, you exit the ring for any reason, or you forfeit. Are both combatants ready? "Hell yeah," Cardin answered, rolling his shoulders in anticipation. "I am," Naruto agreed. "Then begin." The words had barely left her mouth when Cardin roared and made a charge for Naruto. Given his armor and the massive weapon he was wielding, Naruto expected his speed to be much lower than that of Pyrrha's. He was right, of course, though he was surprised to see the boy was quicker on his feet than had expected. No doubt it had come from years of training with all that heavy equipment, ensuring his leg muscles would be able to compensate for the added weight. It was impressive but not enough to overcome him. As soon as Cardin drew near, he saw his arms begin to arch, preparing to bring his mace down. Without even drawing his sword, he used Hyorin Merriwell still in his sheath to smash the back of his thighs, as he swept to the side and out of Cardin's reach. The counter caught him off guard, no doubt assuming his size and overall appearance would be enough to intimidate Naruto into attempting to defend himself. Instead, the assault to his thighs threw him off balance and, coupled with his swing, he stumbled a little as he attempted to regain his balance. As soon as he was good, he turned, snarling at Naruto, who merely smiled back at him. He charged once more, this time going for a low, side sweep meant to prevent him from dodging. It might have worked for a different opponent, but not Naruto. Waiting until the last moment, he leapt into the air, clearing the mace as it swung under his feet, and watching his Cardin's expression turn from one of contempt to that of utter surprise. Cheekily, he winked at the boy mid-jump, just to add insult to injury. Compensating for the lack of resistance on Naruto's part, he used his momentum to swing himself around, ready to counter. Well, good in theory, it didn't account for Naruto countering as he proceeded to smash his nose with the butt of Rinra's sheath. Cardin staggered back, clutching his nose while he silently cursed. "Quit fooling around and fight me, you coward," he barked. "I am fighting you," Naruto replied. "Then draw your sword and fight," he demanded. "Only when you start to make this fight worth my time," Naruto answered. There was an audible "ooh" from the audience along with one student, probably named Celso, yelling out "burn." The commentary only served to anger Cardin further, and without any thought to the consequences of his actions he charged forward. Switching up his tactics, Naruto did the same, throwing his arms behind him as he leaned forward to make his body as small as possible. To everyone watching, it looked like he intended to headbutt Cardin, but as always the shinobi had a different plan in mind. Before they collided, Naruto fell back on his knees, sliding under Cardin's and coming out behind him. Without missing a beat, he turned to the boy before he could maneuver himself around and use his ultimate attack. 1,000 years of pain. There was a momentary pause before Cardin cried out, dropping his mace on the ground and grabbing his butt as he pedaled away. Naruto stood on one knee behind him, a wide smirk on his face as his hands were extended forward, clasped together with both index fingers extended. Naruto's friends stared down at the arena, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and disgust. Much like the other students, they'd watched the fight with obvious anticipation of what was to come. When it became apparent that Naruto didn't consider Cardin to be much of a challenge, his actions and treatment of the boy had only served to fuel their half-hidden amusement. Even Weiss had trouble hiding the smirk that was slowly creeping across her face. However, the moment he stuck his fingers up Cardin's butt, her expression had quickly shifted to one of mortification. A glance over to Miss Goodwitch showed that their instructor looked just as lost, unsure of what to make of the apparent attack. "Did he just?" Ruby asked, unable to fully vocalize her question. "He did," Pyrrha confirmed. "Right up his." "We saw, Ruby, we all saw," his sister quickly interrupted. "Why?" she asked, giving voice to the question on everyone's mind. "Maybe it's a custom from his hometown," Pyrrha offered. "I have heard of a similar game played by kids when I was younger," Ren offered. "That vulgar action is considered a game?" Weiss asked, almost choking on her words. "It's not so vulgar that I can't appreciate his tactics," Ruby said, giving the heiress a challenging glare. "Neither can I," she sneered, meeting the girl's challenge head-on. "Huge, can't you two get along for 2 minutes?" Yang moaned. Naruto waited patiently for his opponent to recover. The attack had certainly taken him by surprise, and while he was fuming, he no less kept some distance between them. The caution with which he moved showed how quickly Cardin had caught on to the situation. That and the odd way he was moving was all the proof he needed to show their fight had run its course. "Meru, you ready to end this?" he asked. "Ready whenever you are, Naruto," it answered. Slipping his sheath back into the belt around his waist, he took a ready stance with his hand hovering over the hilt. The quiet murmuring from the crowd soon settled as everyone recognized the position he was in. Now, after all that time making a fool out of Cardin, he was finally ready to take this fight seriously. Cardin noticed this too, his expression turning deadly serious as he readied his mace. Whatever tricks Naruto had were used up. Now he would pummel him into the ground and leave him begging for mercy. With a cry of rage he raced forward, holding his mace low and to the side. He would be ready. No matter where he dodged or how he moved, he could be ready to shift his stance and compensate, ensuring he had nowhere to run. Like a bull seeing red, his eyes remained glued to Naruto's. Closer and closer he drew. He only just noticed how serious his expression had become, and the way his hand hovered over the handle of his katana. Perhaps if he'd noticed these tiny details sooner he might have been prepared for what came next. Cardin didn't hear him utter the words he usually spoke when unsheathing his sword. The blood was roaring so loudly in his ears all he could hear was the thump, thump, thumping of his heart. The moment the blade left its sheath, a bitter cold wind flew out in his direction. Cardin ignored this, pressing forward with little regard for the sudden drop in temperature. He was an unstoppable force of will, one that would not be deterred by a little cold. Unfortunately for him, Naruto soon proved himself to the immovable object, one that greatly outclassed Cardin's willpower. A fine mist covered the area. Small specks of ice refracted the overhead lights as they danced through the air. Both Naruto's and Cardin's breath came out in a frosted mist as they stared one another down. Satisfied, Naruto sheathed his katana and stepped back to admire his handiwork. Cardin stood, as frozen as a statue, literally, as a thick sheet of ice held him firmly in place. Caught mid-motion, the ice covered him from the neck down, ran along the length of the floor, and traveled a few feet up the arena's force field when it had met resistance. Try as he might, Cardin couldn't move. He tried in vain to crack the ice and break himself out of his prison, but the barrier held fast, preventing him from mounting any resistance against its frigid hold. Well, I would usually ask Mr. Winchester if he could move at all. I think it's quite obvious that he is incapacitated, Miss Goodwitch said, adjusting her glasses slightly as she eyed the boy. Bro. Cardin grunted, trying and failing to free himself. With Mr. Winchester incapacitated, Mr. Uzumaki is the winner, Miss Goodwitch announced. A decent amount of applause emanated from the audience. While Naruto's previous performance was still fresh in their minds, especially that 1,000 years of pain bit, they were nonetheless impressed with how easily he had taken down his opponent, all without causing him any physical harm to boot. Mr. Uzumaki, I don't suppose you can do something regarding Mr. Winchester's current predicament? Miss Goodwitch asked. Oh, yay, sure, he said. Removing his sword once more, he moved around to the large sheet protruding from Cardin's backside. Tapping the ice block lightly, the entire thing began to dissipate into mist as if by magic. Rather than melt into a puddle of water like most would expect, it instead evaporated, leaving in a trail of steam that left no apparent evidence of its existence behind. Satisfied with his work, Naruto replaced his katana back in its sheath and went to return to his seat. Cardin, however, was far from satisfied. The moment he was freed from his prison, he turned and charged. He no longer cared about the fight, about making an example of the furnace freak. He just wanted to make him hurt, to hear him cry out for mercy. He was nearly upon him when his muscles seized up, his body unwilling to move another inch. He struggled in vain, noticing how the strain that bound him was different from the ice block Naruto had encased him in. Mr. Winchester, Miss Goodwitch's voice pierced the red haze that had descended over his mind. The match is over and I had called it in Mr. Uzumaki's favor. If you disagree with my assessment, however, you are more than welcome to discuss it with me this weekend during your detention. All at once she released her telekinetic hold on him, causing him to stumble towards the edge of the arena. All the while Naruto never even glanced back. He had bothered to look behind him even when Cardin was bearing down on him, mace in his hand and raised. For some reason, that small detail only seemed to add insult to injury. A little over a week passed between his spar with Cardin and an annual trip to Forever Full that was chaperoned by Miss Goodwitch. In between that time, Cardin had maintained a certain distance from Naruto, always shooting him nasty glares when he could, but never doing anything more to antagonize him. His racist acts continued, though when Naruto was in the vicinity, he immediately made himself scarce along with his teammates. While it was a slight improvement in his behavior, he wasn't completely convinced that his conflict with Cardin was over. If anything, he suspected that this was merely the calm before the storm that was to follow. Today you will collecting tree sap from the trees found here. Each member of your team has been given a jar along with the tools needed to tap the trees. You will split up into your assigned partnerships and fill your jars. Once that's done, you are allowed to relax and wait before turning the jars into me at the end. Understand that we are still within Grim territory, so keep an eye out for any that might be attracted to the smell of the sap. You all have 2 hours to complete the assignment, Miss Goodwitch instructed. All at once the teams dispersed, some walking deeper into Forever Fall to find suitable trees away from the other teams. Naruto led his partners off towards a promising grove, and listened as the two began to argue over which tress they should tap. I like this one, Ruby announced. Choosing a tree just because you like it doesn't make it suitable for extracting sap, Weiss chided. Oh, and I suppose you have a better method, Ruby challenged. Indeed I do. As a Shinii I am expected to excel in such matters, no matter how superfluous they may be, she said proudly. Ruby rolled her eyes, finding Weiss ever increasing allusions to being a perfect breed of person, more and more annoying. Naruto ignored them both, instead focusing his chakra as he felt the energy that emanated from the trees themselves. While he didn't have much practice in this, he was certain he could find the right trees to tap by testing the energy they gave off. He checked a few, getting hints here and there, until he stopped at one in particular. The energy he felt emanating from it was much greater than the others, enough so to convince him had found a good spot. Setting his jar on the ground, he lightly tapped the funnel into the truck and opened it. A moment later, sticky pink sap began to trickle out, slowly filling his jar. Wow, you found a good one, Ruby said, impressed. Of course he did. It only makes sense that my partner would have a superior instinct for finding the right tree, Weiss butted in. If you two spend less time arguing and more time tapping, then maybe I'll have filled jars and time enough to enjoy the scenery, he replied. Both girls shot one another a glare before walking over and tapping trees on opposite sides of the grove. He sighed, far too tired with their antics, but unwilling to try and bridge the gap that had formed. He would, at another point in time, but not today. Instead, he patiently waited for his jar to fill, now a little over halfway at this point. With the calm scenery behind him and the occasional chipping of birds or insects, he was a little disturbed when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up in warning. Something was coming, but what he wasn't quite sure. Incoming, Kurama announced. Turning around, Naruto caught sight of the object that was tumbling through the air towards him. Without the slightest hesitation, he snatched the object out of the air and glanced at it. He was surprised to see that it was a jar of sap, filled to the brim. How it managed to find itself airborne and headed towards him he wasn't quite sure, but he checked his partners just in case to see if either of them had tripped and accidentally thrown the jar in his direction. A quick look showed that both girls were focused on their own jars, which were just nearing the halfway mark. With that theory gone, the only other explanation was that someone had thrown it on purpose. Scanning the horizon, he could see a slope running along the edge of the grove, where someone would have a clear advantage both in height and in having a peripheral view of the ground below. Sure enough, as he looked around he saw a figure wriggle out of sight, but not before he caught the mop of blonde hair on his head, and a bright green mohawk of another. He shook his head, wondering just how childish Cardin and his lot had to be to target him now of all times. Hey, this tree's all tapped out. I'm going to go find another one. Be right back, he called to the girls. But isn't your jar? Ruby began, pointing to the full jars in either hand. I won't take long, he interrupted, moving deeper into the forest, while maintaining a line of sight on the slope. He walked over to a tree, keeping his back to the ledge, while he pretended to hit his tap into the truck. With his body hiding his actions, it was easy to give off the appearance that he was working and had his guard down. Now that he knew what to listen for, though, he could easily hear the hushed voices and sound of metal scrapping across the ground. He waited just a few moments, turning ever so slightly so as to see behind him without making it too obvious. Sure enough, Cardin rose to his full height, arm outstretched with a jar filled with sap aimed directly at his head. In a move that was too quick for him to register, Naruto flung a kunai at his attacker, shattering the jar upon impact, and spraying Cardin along with his compatriots in sticky sap. Taken by surprise, they cried, coughing and sputtering, as the sap got into their eyes and hair. Try as they might to get it off, the sap stuck tightly to their weapons and armor, making everything sticky and sweet-smelling. Hey, where'd he go? Dove asked. Taking a moment to look back down at the grove, Cardin and his team only just registered Naruto's absence. Somehow, had managed to disappear without them realizing, though the sudden explosion of the jar Cardin had been holding along with the subsequent shower of sap could have provided him ample cover to get away. Hey Cardin, they heard him say. Spinning around, they saw Naruto standing just a few feet away, a rather annoyed expression on his face. In his hand he was tossing a filled jar of sap into the air and catching it, and all at once they felt that it was aimed at them. I believe this belongs to you. Catch, he said, tossing it underhand to them. Despite the ease of the throw, Russell still managed to juggle the jar as he attempted to catch it in his sticky palms. Once it was securely in his grasp, Naruto turned to leave. Where the hell do you think you are going, Furnace Freak? Cardin yelled. Back to my team, Baka, Naruto said, the last word he used going right over the teen's head. I'm tired of this stick measuring contest you insist on having and going to be with some people whose antics I can at least tolerate. What makes you think I'm going to let you leave after the stunt you just pulled? Cardin challenged, pulling out his mace and just barely noticing how much more his grip stuck to it than usual. Oh no, the group of sticky young boys has me cornered. Whatever shall I do? He said mockingly. Yay, the only thing that could make this situation any more awkward is if that was baby oil instead of sap, he said, causing some of the boys to blush at the image. Why don't you do yourselves a favor and go get that gun cleaned off? If you remember what Miss Goodwitch said, some of the grim are attracted. The words had barely left Naruto's mouth when the bestial roar of an Ursa split the air. He cursed, pulling his katana from its sheath and faced the forest. Cardin did the same, although with a much more nervous look on his face. His teammates, on the other hand, took off running, leaving them to defend themselves. Ursa, Lake and Yang along with Ruby and Weiss, looked up from what they were doing. Presently they had all finished filling their jars, and were currently hanging out with their sister team JNPR chatting while enjoying the day. The calm atmosphere was quickly broken by the screams of terror, as members of Cardin's team came running into the clearing. Before they could ask what was going on, their attention fell on the small handful of Ursa that were trailing behind them. What the hell? Yang said, leaping to her feet and deploying her gauntlets. Where did those Ursa come from? Weiss asked. They were probably being attracted by the sap. They're covered in it, Ren pointed out. How did that happen? Ruby asked. We'll have to ask them later, for now though, Pyrrha said, deploying her javelin. In one expertly aimed throw, the javelin flew through the air, skewering the nearest Ursa through the chest before being ripped out again, and sent flying back into Pyrrha's waiting hand. The rest of the team followed suit, doubling up on the Grim and dispatching them with relative ease. Given that their attention was squarely on the sap-covered teens cowering behind them huntsmen, it was a simple task to kill all the Ursa. Once they all dead, however, they soon turned their attention of Cardin's friends. Hey you huge! Yang cried, having grabbed one of the boys, only to drop him the moment she felt the sticky sap coat her hand. What the hell? Why are you all covered in sap? It was our idea, Dove said. Explain, Pyrrha said, standing over them in a manner that was very intimidating. Cardin wanted revenge against the blonde furnace, he said, his mouth running like an overflowing tap. That's not a furnace, Blake corrected. Other foreigners would be able to tell if he was or not. Yay, and their birthmarks, not whiskers, Ruby added. It didn't matter. Cardin didn't like how he was humiliated during their spare, so he wanted to get back at him. We followed him from a nearby ridge with an extra jar of sap and a box of wasps. Our plan was to hit him with the jar and release the wasps. You what? Yang said, her eyes turning crimson as her hair started to glow. It didn't work, Russell quickly stated, holding up his hands in surrender. The first jar we threw he somehow noticed and caught out of the air. That would explain the extra jar he was carrying, Weiss said, exchanging a look with Ruby. When he walked off alone we followed and tried again. This time, though, the jar exploded in Cardin's hand before he could throw it. It exploded. How? John asked. We don't know. 1 minute Hess holding it up, ready to throw, and the next minute it shattered and showered us with sap. He used the chaos to come up behind us. That's when Cardin lost his temper and challenged him to a fight, but the Ursa showed up and we took off. Leaving your team leader behind, Ren pointed out. We didn't know what to do. An Ursa Major showed up with a whole pack of Ursa. We were outmatched. You all are clearly underestimating Naruto's capabilities, Weiss pointed out. What do you mean? John asked. He killed a Goliath all on his own, a feat that caught General Ironwood's attention, and included him writing a letter of recommendation for him to come to Beacon. An Ursa Major is nothing to him. Even so, perhaps it would be best if we went to help him just in case, Pyrrha suggested. You never know how things might be going. Cardin dove to the left, his mace almost slipping from his hands, thanks to the sap that was covering it. The moment the Ursa had entered the clearing, his teammates had taken off with the whole pack trailing in their wake. Despite Naruto being the closer target, the Ursa Major had turned its attention to him and began attacking in earnest. It didn't take a genius to know that the reason behind this was due to the sap that was coating his clothing and armor. What's worse was the fact that same sap was making it difficult for him to fight, as every time he tried to attack the sap would either cause his weapon to slip or stick to him, rendering most of his attacks useless. To add insult to injury, rather than help him, Naruto had instead settled himself down at the base of a tree, leisurely sipping from one of the jars of sap had thrown at him like it was iced tea, and watching him struggle. Hey, you going to help me or what? Cardin shouted, dodging yet another attack from the Ursa. Oh, but I'm just a funnest freak. Why would you want my help? Surely that would only stain your reputation to have me aid you in a fight you clearly have a handle on, Naruto yelled back mockingly. Cardin growled, obviously angry with how easily Naruto could mock him whilst being attacked by an Ursa Major. He didn't have long to focus on this, however, as his distracted mind cost him precious time, something the Grim reminded him of, as a swipe from its paw grazed him, shaving off some of his aura in the process. He grunted, taking a few steps back only to trip on a root and fall flat on his ass. Sticky, tired, and knowing that there was no way he could outrun the Ursa in time to get help, he started up as the Grim bore down on him with a meaty paw. He was surprised when he saw his breath misting before his eyes, and even more so when he saw his own reflection staring back at him. It took his brain a moment to register the thick sheet of ice that had materialized before him, trapping the Ursa's paw mid-swing. Slowly turning his head, he saw a trail of ice running along the ground where it pulled at the tip of Naruto's katana. The boy strode up to them, unperturbed by the Grim that was slashing and biting the wall of ice, in an attempt to break free. It took momentary notice of Naruto's presence before a flick and quick slash found its head cleaved from its shoulders. The headless corpse, already beginning to disintegrate, slumped down against the wall, while its head landed neatly between Cardin's legs, its maw still open wide in a growl bearing teeth. Let me make one thing clear, Cardin, Naruto said, grabbing the boy's attention as his katana hung loosely but dangerously at his side. This ends now. All the bullying, all the racist comments, all the attempts to make me cow down to your overinflated sense of ego, is over and done. Next time you pull something like this, I won't stop it from blowing up in your face. Cardin didn't answer. He was only capable of staring up at him, gaping like a fish. Before long, though, the sound of leaves and grass crunching underfoot drew their attention. They looked over to see Naruto's team racing towards them with Miss Goodwitch in tow. The woman's eyes roved over the scene, taking in Cardin's sap-covered form, the wall of melting ice, and the dissolving Ursa's corpse. They soon flicked back to Cardin and narrowed dangerously. Explain, she said. Now, some Ursa attacked Cardin and his team while they were gathering sap, Naruto said, cutting in before Cardin even had an answer formulated. I was gathering some nearby when I heard the commotion. I think they smashed one of the jars, covering them in the sap, and attracting the major to their position. Cardin and I fought it and killed it just before you arrived, he said, before glancing down to Cardin's dumbfounded expression. Right. The look Naruto gave was one that urged him to corroborate his story. Even if he didn't like him, which was something that hadn't exactly improved despite their fight, the fact that he was now helping to protect him from Goodwitch's wrath meant he would have to be an idiot to try and act against him, as the alternatives would not be in his favor at all. Why yay, it's just like he said, he replied, slowly picking himself up off the ground. Linda eyed them for a moment, obviously attempting to catch any hint that this might be a lie, before letting out a tired sigh. Very well. Gather your things, gentlemen. We'll be leaving soon and you and your team, Mr. Winchester, are in dire need of a shower. Nodding their consent, the two boys made to follow her out of the forest. Naruto's team quickly surrounded him, giving him a look that demanded the truth to what they knew was an obvious lie. He held up a hand, promising to let them all know the truth once they were back at their dorm. It was going to be a long day for him. Vale. The vital festival had taken Vale by storm, descending on the kingdom like a swarm of locusts on a field of wheat. If it wasn't the shops that were hanging signs and banners in their front windows, promoting souvenirs to tourists or dust and weapon mods and accessories to visiting students and huntsmen, it was the overall decorations that had begun to transform the city itself. The high-traffic areas especially were littered with them, ensuring that every available space had been taken up with promotions and decorations of every kind. It somewhat reminded Naruto of the festivals that would take place back home, only this one seemed a bit more intense. Back in his village, food and game stalls would be set up along with stalls for vendors selling things like small toys and masks for kids to wear. There had been decorations as well, though that had typically been limited to the festival area itself. Here, however, you were bombarded with it, and, in all honesty, it was beginning to make him feel a little uncomfortable. The only thing that was more unnerving to him was currently Weiss. On a typical day, the girl was usually proper, uptight, and even a bit snooty. They'd all come to tolerate this about her, considering it as part of her charm, but today she was acting in a manner that was a complete 180 from her usual demeanor. She had actually been the one to recommend, insist really, but there was no sense trying to tell her that to her team that they all spend the day down in Vale. More often than not it was either Yang or Ruby who wanted to venture out to Vale with Weiss reluctantly coming along, though complaining about every little thing along the way. To see how she was now, however, had them all exchanging anxious looks. Even Kurama was a bit put off by the display. "Isn't wonderful?" she asked cheerily. "A festival dedicated to the cultures of Remnant and we'll be here to experience it all." "This girl is off her medication," Kurama said in Naruto's head. "That's not a very nice thing to say about our teammate," Naruto shot back. "She's your teammate, not mine, and don't chastise me. We share this body and I know you are creeped out by her behavior too. I can sense your feelings along with your thoughts. Either someone spiked her juice this morning, or she suffered a brain injury in the middle of the night that's caused a massive swing in her mood. She's just excited for the festival." "Anyone would feel the same," Naruto said as he tried to push aside the anxiety he was beginning to feel. "Can you imagine the amount of planning and organization that goes into such an event?" she asked. "Wow, Weiss, you sure know how to kill the mood, don't cha?" Yang asked. Yeah, I've been smiling so much it's honestly starting to creep me out," Ruby added. "Quiet you two. You could do well to learn from this experience as well as the history behind the festival itself," Weiss chided. "Is that why you insisted we come down here? To learn?" "Weiss, I'm not going to slog through a full week of school, only to spend my weekends doing some off-the-books research," Yang complained. "Considering how much of that time you spend actually sleeping in class, this would be an excellent opportunity for you to catch up on everything you've missed. There's so much that history dedicated to the festival itself. Think of everything we can learn about Vale's culture, the cultures of the visiting kingdoms. I get the feeling this is building up to something I'm not going to like," Kurama commented. "And most importantly, all the information we can gather on the visiting teams which we can use to exploit their weaknesses during the tournament," she said, her cherry smile quickly turning sinister. "Kill it. Kill it with fire," Kurama demanded. "Speaking of the tournament, what was it like out where you live, Naruto?" Yang asked. "Oh, this is my first time actually," he replied. "What?" Weiss blurted out. "Yeah, I've never experienced the Vital Festival before," Ruby asked, giving him a concerned look. "Where have you been living all this time?" Yang asked. "With a bunch of bandits out in the middle of nowhere," Kurama replied. "The village I grew up in was pretty isolated. I'd heard of the festival but never experienced it, even when it came to Mistral." Weiss questioned. "No, but we did having something similar. Growing up we had a yearly festival centered around a coming-of-age ceremony called the Chunin exams." "I've never heard of that," Weiss replied. "It sounds somewhat familiar. Not quite sure where I heard about it though, Blake must. It was something we conducted with some nearby villages. Teens of a certain age would travel to the hosting village to take an exam, and even take part in a tournament. At the end the elected leaders of our villages would decide on who was granted the title of Chunin. Sometimes it was one person, other times multiple, and there were even cases of no one being chosen." "What's a Chunin?" Ruby asked. "It's a title. Basically, we each had responsibilities, and our titles represented the level of responsibility as well as the expectations that came with them. There are others beyond that which I'll explain another time. All in all, it was a major part of our culture and something that we all looked forward to taking part in when we grew older." "What was the highest rank you could reach?" Blake asked, showing genuine interest in what Naruto was explaining to them. "Hokage, which basically means you are the village leader." "How many of these Hokages have you had?" Weiss asked. "4 so far. Our village was being run by the third Hokage when I left, though he passed away not too long ago. I think they were in the midst of appointing a new one when I departed." That sounds very interesting," I'd like to hear more about it some point. It seems like your village has some deep-rooted history. Usually villages out on the frontier don't last very long due to the grim, but from what you've told us so far, the alliance your village has with these others must be why you've all managed to survive this long. Yay, something along those lines, Naruto replied. Something doesn't make sense though, Ruby said. You said your village was being run by the third village leader, and when he passed away they were looking for a replacement. Yay, they would be the fifth Hokage. So, what happened to the fourth? He died, he said nonchalantly. Beep. Ruby said in surprise. I am so sorry. Ruby, you dunce, Weiss chided. Don't worry about it. It happened a long time ago, about the same time I was born. I don't really remember, and we've mostly moved on from what happened. What did happen, if you don't mind me asking? Weiss prodded. Our village was attacked. A lot of people died including the fourth Hokage. Bandits? Blake asked. No, a grim incursion. A big one. Damn, not too many people can say they walked away from that one, Yang commented. Yay, a lot of people died to protect our village, including my parents. That little revelation was enough to dampen everyone's mood, enough so that they fell into an awkward silence that was only broken by the sounds of the crowds of people around them. While their external conversation may have hit a speed bump, Naruto's own conversation with Kurama was still ongoing. I must admit, that was an interesting way of creating some backstory for yourself. Certainly better than saying you spent most of your time in Mistral working with and training alongside some bandits. I learned from the best. Sometimes the best way to lie to people is to tell them the truth, Naruto replied. With a few creative embellishments, Kurama added. Hey, Naruto, can I ask you something? Ruby tentatively asked. Yay, sure. What about? Why did you leave your village? Was it to become a huntsman or was it for some other reason? She asked, pressing her fingers together nervously. It was to chase down a friend who was obsessed with taking revenge for his dead family, he thought to himself, momentarily recalling the climactic battle had with his old teammate, rival, and friend Sasuke. None of this he could really admit to them. It was too outlandish for anyone to believe and he knew it. However, there were some parts of it he could tell them that he might be able to rework to fit the narrative he was building, if only to make himself appear more like he was from their world, and not from another one that was completely foreign to them. He took a few moments to craft his response, knowing that his long drawn-out deliberation would only work to his advantage. When he was finally ready he took a breath, knowing he had their full undivided attention. I didn't have very many friends growing up in my village. I was largely seen and treated as an outcast. Honestly, had that been the only reason for me leaving, not too many people would have argued with my decision. It wasn't the reason you left, was it? Weiss asked, catching on to what he was saying. No, to be perfectly honest, I had every intention of staying. I even had aspirations of becoming the next Hokage. The village leader? Ruby asked. Yep. The Hokage isn't just a village leader. They're the most respected and revered member of the village. Becoming the Hokage means you are someone deserving of everyone's respect. I wanted to become the Hokage so I could prove them wrong about me. Running away just felt like I would be giving up. That is a noble goal, if a bit misguided. That said, I can certainly understand why you would want to attain such a prestigious title. It does make me wonder why you left your village in the first place, Weiss commented. It was to bring a friend home, he replied. Growing up I didn't have a lot of friends. Those that I did, however, were some of the people closest to me. One of them was a person named Uchiha Sasuke. He was an orphan, like me, and had lost his whole family when he was little. We were trained alongside one another, ultimately becoming rivals and even begrudgingly considering one another friends after a while. I even had a crush on the girl who had a crush on him. Oh, a love triangle. That's always fun, Yang said, eyeing both Ruby and Weiss as she spoke. Yay, well, unfortunately he wasn't interested in that. He was more interested in finding the man responsible for his family's deaths and avenging them. He wanted revenge. Weiss asked. Yay, enough so that he left our village and everyone behind to pursue it. I was asked by his crush to go find and bring him home. I didn't need to be asked twice. I already had the intention of doing just that and went off in search of him. What happened? Ruby inquired. I found him. I tried talking him down, convincing him to return home with me. He refused. We argued for a while and before long our argument devolved into a fight. It got bad. Real bad. I ended up getting knocked unconsciousness towards the end. Just before I blacked out, I almost thought he might actually try and kill me. He didn't, obviously, but when I woke up he was gone. Since then I've been traveling the world, looking for him, with the hopes of bringing him home and keeping my promise. That's what led you to becoming a huntsman. It would give you a better chance of tracking him down, and maybe even beating some sense into him, Weiss concluded. Yay, something like that, Naruto agreed, letting her craft her own ending for him. Do you think you'll meet him again? Ruby asked. What do you mean? Well, do you think you'll maybe see him during the tournament? If you two were friends and rivals, maybe he got the same idea you did and decided to become a huntsman as well. Ruby's explanation caused him to stop, a question he hadn't considered before beginning to form in his mind. What if Sasuke had ended up traveling to Remnant just like he had? Granted, he had nothing to back this up, but there also wasn't any proof to say he was wrong. Given what had happened and the powers had borrowed from Orochimaru along with his curse mark, there was a vague possibility he might have ended up in this world as well, just in a completely different place than him. Of course, if this was true then it would make sense why they hadn't seen one another. Remnant was a big place, after all. There was no telling where he might have ended up and with whom. Not only that, but Sasuke had always been better trained and disciplined than him. There was nothing to say he wasn't out there, looking for a way back, silently watching Naruto and taking note of his progress. I hadn't considered that, he replied. Well, if he is walking the same path as you, there's a good chance we'll see him during the tournament, and, if not, then he might just see you. The Vital Festival is televised all over Remnant, after all. No doubt he'll see us fighting in the tournament as well. Yay, that makes sense. They walked for a while, Naruto silently contemplating the possibility of Sasuke having traveled to this world along with him, and, if so, how he was supposed to find him. As far as his priorities went, figuring out if Sasuke was here and convincing him to go back with him were fairly low on his list of priorities. His main reason for joining Beacon was to learn more about Remnant itself, and hopefully find a way home. If a way existed and he discovered it, then convincing Sasuke to come home with him just might prove to be that much easier. It would mean he could hold the possibility of him taking revenge for his family's deaths over his head, as shallow as that was. However, there was also the small chance that Sasuke might have had the same idea, only he didn't know Naruto was here, nor would he be looking for him. If he found a way back home first, it could leave Naruto stranded with no way home, and no way of fulfilling his promise to Sakura as well. Hey, somebody stop that no-good stowaway. Shouting from the docks quickly drew Naruto out of his contemplation, and he glanced towards the water, where he could see a small ship was docked. Several men were shouting and chasing after a boy with blonde hair, tanned skin, and a monkey tail, wearing a white unbuttoned shirt, jeans rolled up to his knees, and a pair of sneakers. Despite being outnumbered, the boy proved to be nimble and quick on his feet. He easily outmaneuvered his pursuers, dancing around them before climbing up a nearby lamppost to hang from by his tail, while he ate a banana. Hey, I'm a great stowaway. A no-good stowaway would have gotten caught, the boy argued. The men ignored his comment, racing towards him with the intent of surrounding him, and cutting off all escape routes. This proved futile as he quickly polished off his banana and threw the peel into their midst. Unable to react fast enough, one man slipped on the peel and, in his panic, reached out for something to steady himself. That something proved to be his fellow sailors, who came toppling down to the ground in a mass of limbs. With a hearty laugh, the boy jumped down from his perch before racing up the docks and past them. As he ran past them, Naruto saw his face turn towards Blake, and for a moment he thought the boy might have winked at her. He was gone a moment later, leaving him standing there puzzled. Weiss, on the other hand, was quick to recover. After him, she ordered. Before anyone could point out the fact that she wasn't their team's leader, she was off and running after the boy. Reluctantly they followed, doing their best to keep up with Weiss, who was surprisingly fast, despite the fact she was wearing heels. She didn't make it far, though, as she rounded a corner and promptly slammed into someone. They caught up to her to see the air splayed out on the ground with the other person laying just opposite her, and looking surprisingly fine despite the unexpected collision. Huge, my head, Weiss groaned, sitting up and rubbing a small bump on her head. Weiss, are you okay? Ruby asked, rushing to aid her. Yes, I'm alright. What did I run into? Salutations. The other person, a girl by the looks of her, said loudly. Naruto and the girls jumped back, caught off guard by the girl's jubilant greeting. It was certainly an unexpected one, not only for the fact that Sheepin had laid out on the ground only moments earlier, but that she had risen to her feet and had a cheery smile on her face, despite what had just happened. It was less reassuring and more creepy, a thought which he could see every member of his team was no doubt sharing, if the looks on their faces was anything to go by. Hello. Ruby said, unsure of how to respond. Greetings, fellow humans. My name is Penny Palladino. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Yay, sure, Yang said, giving the girl an awkward glance. Hi Penny, Ruby began. Ruby Rose, of Team NWBYR, led by Uzumaki Naruto. You are also one of his partners, with the other being Weiss Shni, Penny interrupted. How did you know all that? Ruby asked, a little put off by the girl's sudden divulging of information regarding their team. Probably because we weren't the only ones who realized just how important and advantageous it is to look into the other teams participating in the tournament, Weiss explained hotly. Yes, it is exactly as Miss Shni just said and no other reason, Penny replied with a smile. There is something seriously wrong with this girl, Kurama commented. Be nice, she's probably just nervous about meeting new people, Naruto replied, making the excuse for the girl, despite the feeling of unease that was creeping up his spine. I'm serious, Naruto, this girl's isn't human. What do you mean? He asked, noticing the urgency in Kurama's voice. Everything about her is off. Her scent, her heartbeat, even her eyes. They all seem artificial. I can't be sure, but I think she's one of those artificial mannequins we encountered in Atlas. The Elasian Nights. You mean she's a robot? I think so, but I can't be sure. How come? I can sense her life force. It's odd, but it's there, and only a living creature with a soul can generate life force. Well, that's interesting, Naruto must, uncertain of how he should process this new information. You think she might have started out as a living person, but had an accident and was put into an artificial body to keep her alive. It could be possible, Kurama agreed. Normally I'd say it's too similar to those sci-fi comics you read sometimes, but given all the strange things we encountered in Atlas, not to mention the rest of Remnant, I can't say it's not possible. Still, the way she acts is rather strange. Even if it were true, most people wouldn't greet each other by saying greetings fellow humans. Maybe she was young when it happened, Naruto surmised, and experienced some serious brain damage as a result, Kurama concluded. By the way, Miss Paladina, you wouldn't have happened to see a furnace run by this way, would you? Weiss asked, completely oblivious to the private conversation Naruto had been having with Kurama. Well, yes, I've seen several furnaces during my tour of the city today, the girl answered cheerily. We're looking for one in particular. Has a monkey furnace, blonde-haired, a real ruffian. He ran by here just a moment ago. Let me search my memory banks, Penny replied, oblivious to the odd looks Naruto and the girls gave her. I'm sorry, but I don't recall anyone matching that description. I've seen at least 3 monkey furnaces and over a dozen blondes today, but none that coincide with your description. He escaped us then, Weiss snarled. No doubt has off to meet with some of his White Fang associates. Excuse you, that's racist. Blake barked. How's it racist? Weiss asked in an indignant tone. They are assuming that just because has a furnace that has part of the White Fang. You have no evidence to support your biased assumptions. I'm basing my observations off of personal experience. Thank you very much, she replied angrily. No, you are basing them on the assumption that just because has a furnace then he must be part of the White Fang as well. That's no different than saying anything with the STC logo must have been acquired through the exploitation of their workers and backroom deals, neither of which would be too far off. How dare you, Weiss snarled. Please tell me they're not going to be doing this all day long, Kurama pleaded. Despite Kurama's wish, Blake and Weiss continued to argue the whole way back to their dorm room. Not even the loud droning of the bullhead was enough to drown them out, as their volume had risen to such heights that they could make them out perfectly, despite the overbearing engine noise. It was enough to tempt him to start looking for one of the empty dorm rooms to crash in for the night. Anything to get away from the fighting, if only so he could get some sleep. The worst part of it, though, came when Weiss attempted to drag Naruto into their squabble and get him to support her viewpoint. Say what you would about him, well, he was loyal, he wasn't stupid. You agree with me, don't you, Naruto? Weiss asked. Don't try to involve me. This has nothing to do with me, he said, crossing his arms in a hands-off fashion. But I'm your partner, she scoffed. And I'm also Blake's teammate and your team leader, he said, pointing to them both of which are good reasons for me to not take sides and maintain as unbiased a stance on this issue as possible. Weiss scowled, obviously disappointed by this turn of events, but Blake gave him an appreciative look. He merely nodded in response. Well, had only heard about the White Fang through word of mouth and various news outlets, had known about as little about them as he had the STC. Again, what had heard was mostly word of mouth, both good and bad. In the end had decided not to give the two of them much thought. Aside from the party had been made to attend, he didn't care much for the STC and didn't feel any pressing need to ally himself with them. Despite what you may think, I'm well aware of how the world sees me and my family. I've had to live with the rumors and scandals surrounding my father's questionable business practices, and I know how that is placed in a negative light. As a result, I've spent most of my life attempting to please him and his overinflated sense of perfection, while also dodging attempts on my life and my family's from people like the White Fang. I've even had to attend several funerals of family friends, associates and business partners who became targets of those terrorists, all because of my family name. You may think I'm racist and biased when it comes to the furnace, but I have years of personal experience for why I act the way I do. That still doesn't excuse your overall treatment of him. I understand that living in fear of terrorists would leave you wary to be around other foreigners, but that doesn't give you the right to lump them all into the same group without proof of their actions. Well, maybe if they would do the same with my family instead of attacking us without provocation, Weiss snapped. Well, maybe we were just tired of being pushed around. Blake shouted. The room went deadly silent as the weight of Blake's words sank in. Yang and Ruby stared at her, stunned by what they'd just heard. It could easily be explained away as a slip of the tongue, but given Blake's mortified expression, it was anything but. Weiss' own face went through several emotions, beginning with surprise before moving on to confusion, then disgust, before finally settling on subtle fear, as she began to slowly back away from her. Blake barely registered this, her eyes darting towards the door before she bolted, bursting through and down the hall within seconds. It took a moment for the events to kick into everyone's minds, as Yang quickly sprang after her partner, while Weiss sank to the floor, relief mixed with mortification at what had just happened. Well, it seems the cat's out of the bag, literally, Kurama said. Yay, and somehow I think things are only going to get worse from here, Naruto replied. The next several hours until morning seemed to drag on. Yang returned nearly an hour after she had given chase, having failed to locate her partner, and hoping she had returned to their dorm. Weiss was beside herself and kept insisting that they take the matter to headmaster immediately. Naruto dismissed this, pointing out that Ozpin would have known if Blake had been White Fang, and as such would have intentionally allowed her to placed on the same team as Weiss, if he believed her life was in any danger. While Weiss remained unconvinced, he did manage to placate her by offering to stand guard should Blake return. She reluctantly agreed, going to bed while Naruto took up a watch until she had fallen asleep. After that, he too went to bed, asking Kurama to wake him if he sensed Blake's presence. While he didn't expect her to come back tonight, he did want to take the opportunity to talk with her as she did. There was obviously more to her story than they'd been told, and he was curious to find out more. The next morning at breakfast, Weiss immediately regaled Team JNPR with the events of the previous day, events which were greatly exaggerated by her own personal account, and her claims that at any moment Blake could have killed her in her sleep. Naruto waited patiently for her to finish before he retold the events of the previous day, minus Weiss' biased accounting and sticking to the facts. Weiss was rather perturbed by this but stayed quiet. It was only when Yang suggested that they go down into Vale to look for Blake when she started to argue against it. It was obvious Weiss wanted nothing to do with her teammate anymore, and, as far as she was concerned, she was as good as dead. Despite this, both Ruby and Naruto agreed, grabbing their stuff and making for the landing pads moments later. When Weiss protested about them going, Naruto suggested she stay at Beacon while they went to look for her. Being faced with 3-to-1 odds, Weiss reluctantly came along, stating she didn't want to be left alone, as Blake would no doubt use that as an opportunity to attack her. Naruto merely rolled his eyes, refraining from pointing out that Beacon was the safest place she could be, and that, if Blake did attack her, fully trained huntsmen would come to her aid in moments. As such, they now found themselves down in Vale, having spent a few hours talking and asking people about Blake, but with nothing to show for it. They were effectively looking for a needle in a stack of needles, and, given that it was just the three of them, Weiss refused to help look and simply stood around complaining. Their efforts would prove all but futile in the end. I don't understand why you all insist on wasting your time looking for her, when we should be going to the headmaster or better yet the police, Weiss complained. They'll have her arrested. I'm not doing that to my partner, not until we've had a chance to talk things out, Yang countered. She's a criminal, Yang, she all but admitted it to us last night. They are just assuming that she is. She never actually said she was part of the White Fang, only that she's a furnace. Then why did she run, Yang? The innocent don't run. Maybe she ran because she was afraid of a certain white-haired, entitled little bitch turning around and making her life a living hell, simply because she was a furnace the whole time, Yang growled, stalking up to Weiss, and pushing her face into her guard. I'm honestly surprised it took all of you this long to realize she was a furnace, Naruto commented. His off-the-cuff comment was enough to break them loose from their argument. Weiss and Yang slowly turned their heads to regard him, giving him a quizzical look. They obviously thought he was joking, but, from what they could make of his expression, he was quite serious. Even Ruby found this surprising, looking to her sister for confirmation and receiving a shoulder shrug in response. You knew she was a furnace? Weiss asked. Yes. The entire time. Yang chimed in. Yes, he said again. How? Weiss asked, clearly unconvinced. How were you able to notice that she was a furnace when the rest of us didn't? Turbo obviously. He replied, using it as a convenient excuse despite Kurama being the one to actually let him in on her secret. Huh? Turbo? The one she never took off. Not to sleep or shower or at any point in front of us, at least, he pointed out. The girls' collective looks of disbelief quickly gave way to realization as they each thought back to their interactions with Blake and slowly began putting the pieces together. He was right. At no point had any of them thought to question Blake's overarching need to keep her bow on at all times. At the time they had considered it something of an accessory, an extension of her combat uniform, and thus hadn't thought to ask her about it. Now, though, they soon realized she had been using it to conveniently hide her furnace heritage from them in plain sight, and they'd been none the wiser. Oh my gods, has right, Yang groaned. Naruto noticed it before I did and I'm her partner. She does eat a lot of fish, Ruby added. If you knew, why didn't you inform the rest of us? Weiss asked, quickly overcoming her disbelief and rounding on him with an accusatory glare. It wasn't my secret to reveal, he said easily. Excuse me. Blake obviously wanted to keep her furnace heritage a secret. Whatever her reasons for doing so are hers alone to tell, but I suspect it had something to do with how poorly the furnace are treated, not only in the kingdoms, but also in school. Even though Beacon caters to both humans and furnace, the furnace are still treated poorly by some of the other students. Knowing that, it doesn't surprise me she would keep something like this a secret. That still doesn't excuse the fact that she kept it from us. We should have been informed, Weiss argued. Why? Because you're Weisshi? He asked, watching with some satisfaction as she flinched back at the comment. The fact that none of the teachers informed us probably means that there was nothing pressing to inform us of. I'm sure if there was something in her background of the criminal level, we would have been informed of it immediately. I honestly doubt she would have been let into Beacon otherwise, he said, watching his wife quietly fumed, any counter-arguments she might have had beginning to fall flat. Well, I don't trust her. She ran off without any explanation. We should be taking this matter to the headmaster, at least to inform him of what's happened, Weiss stated. We'll do that after we've found her and given her chance to tell us her side of things, he said, turning and walking down the street. Where are you going? Weiss asked. To try and find her. Our efforts aren't going to do much to help us locate her. I'm going to see if I can at least locate and corner her, hopefully long enough to talk her down. And how do you plan on doing that? Vale is a large city. You don't even know where to start looking, Weiss pointed out. There's a bookstore nearby that she liked to frequent, he pointed out. I'm going to ask the owner if has seen her at all today and maybe start from there. Just so you're aware, I was trained on how to track people in an urban environment. Part of our training for the Chunin exams back in my village. Hopefully it'll come in handy here. I'll come with you. It'll be easier with 2 people, Weiss offered. No, I'll stay with Yang and Ruby. Having more people coming along will only slow me down. What? She said aghast, but I'm your partner. They are also partly to blame for Blake running away like she did. If she sees you there's a good chance she'll just take off again. Better I go it alone than with you in tow. You expect me to just stand around and wait while you go off after a criminal? She scoffed. Allegedly, Yang commented. Honestly, I'd rather you went back to Beacon and waited for us there, he said, ignoring the indignant look she gave him in response. It would be more helpful than you are now, doing nothing but standing around complaining. Weiss recoiled at the comment and Naruto didn't wait for a response before he set off. Had already wasted enough time arguing with her, and there was no telling what kind of trouble Blake might have gotten into while he was out here searching for her. Kurama, think you can pick her out of the city? He asked. I figured you were going to ask that. I can sense her life force. She's not too far away. I'll direct you as best I can. The rest will be up to you. I hope you have a plan for how you're going to handle things. When do I not? Naruto asked, ignoring the scoff from his friend as he took off down the street. Sun sipped the herbal tea had ordered, the overall taste of plant-flavored water lost on him, as he attempted to digest the veritable shitstorm that had been Blake's explanation of her life growing up in the White Fang, helping to turn it onto his more violent path, and then jumping ship when things became too much for her. Honestly, had just tagged her as being a cute honest girl who was hiding her heritage in an effort to avoid being bullied and ran off when her secret was revealed to her team sooner than Shed wanted. Had tagged himself as the charming rapscallion who would swap in to offer a shoulder to cry on, and an ear to listen to her, as they slowly drew closer, inevitably starting a relationship that would lead to something more down the line. At least, that's what had pictured in his mind. In his defense, his only point of reference had been the library of romcoms his cousin kept on her scroll, and practically swooned over during her movie nights. Had never really cared for them all that much. Give him a decent detective movie any day. All that said, he could be forgiven for having felt like he might have bitten off more than he could chew. The moment Blake revealed Shed been a former member of the Fang, had nearly choked on his tea, and soon found his confidence levels taking a nosedive as she continued to speak. Still, Sun Wukong was no coward. He didn't back down from a challenge, no matter how demanding or imposing it may seem. He merely needed to reassess the situation and plan accordingly. First step was helping Blake make up with her teammates. That would obviously ingratiate him with her friends, and help him come up with more ways he could use as excuses for spending time with her. So what now? He asked. Now I need to find the White Fang. What? Are you crazy? I need to find them and prove that they're not behind the dust robberies happening all over Vale. I need to show Weiss that they're not criminals like she assumes them to be. Aren't they terrorists though? Sun pointed out. That's not the point. I'm not excusing what they've done outside of Vale to earn that reputation. I just need to prove that someone else is using that reputation to hide their own actions and mislead the police while they conduct these robberies. Alright, how are you going to do that? I have a plan. There's a dust shipment arriving at the Vale Harbor tonight. No doubt whoever is behind these robberies will want to hit it the moment it arrives. And you're going to do this alone. I have to, Sun, she replied. Don't you think that's a bad idea? I'm all for proving your teammates wrong about something they're just ready to assume is true, but I can't just sit by and let you go this alone. Maybe you should contact your team, have them back you up. No, if I do that then they'll just drag me off to Beacon. We'll never get this resolved, and they'll never be able to prove to Weiss that she's wrong. And what if they decide to involve themselves? He asked. They'd have to know what I'm planning for starters. Are you saying you're going to run off and tell them on me? She asked, narrowing her gaze on him in a threatening manner. No, I'm just saying, he replied defensively. I only thought to ask because the blonde-haired gut you were with yesterday is standing right behind you. Blake didn't even think to question whether or not he was joking with her. In one swift movement she rose from her seat and turned, ready to bolt the moment she caught sight of her team leader. She figured she'd see him in the doorway to the second floor of the cafe, having arrived here by chance, and possibly having not noticed her. It would give her time to leap over the balcony and onto the street below. What she hadn't anticipated was for him to be standing right behind her, eyes narrowed and mouth set in a firm frown. Before she had a chance to react, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder, shoving her back down into her seat, before she had a chance to run towards the edge. "We need to talk," he said, his firm tone implying she was to remain seated. Hi, I'm Sun Wukong, leader of Team SSSN from Haven Academy," Sun replied in a nervous voice, as he extended his hand to shake Naruto's. "Uzumaki Naruto, leader of Team NWBYR. Thanks for keeping an eye on our wayward teammate," he said, shaking his hand firmly. "No problem," Sun replied, relaxing at the friendly gesture offered. "Could I ask for a moment with Blake? She and I need to discuss a few things, teammate to teammate." Sure, I'll leave you two to it," he said, vacating his seat. Blake shot him an accusatory glare as he maneuvered around to let Naruto sit. In response, he gave her an apologetic shrug, asking what she'd expected him to do. In truth, she could blame him. She hadn't expected any of her teammates to locate her, let alone corner her so easily. Now here she was, sitting across from her team leader and about to get lectured for running away. Her eyes flickered to the balcony edge once more, and she contemplated the odds of her managing to make it before Naruto could start to pursue. "I would if I were you," he said, drawing her attention back to him. "Even if you did manage to evade me, it'd still find you and then it'd tie you down and haul you back to Beacon for good measure." "Why haven't you done that already?" she asked curiously. "I know there's a reason behind your decision to bolt and you let us know last night." Now, Weiss has been very vocal regarding her reasons for why she dislikes. "You mean hates?" Blake interrupted. "Dislikes Faunus," he continued, "and while I can understand her reasoning to a point, I also know there's your side to consider as well." "You honestly think it matters?" she scoffed. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't," he replied honestly. "Look, I understand you're doing this to try and fulfill your role as team leader, but drop it, okay? You have no idea what my life has been like. You have no idea what it feels like to be treated like trash, to be overlooked and judged simply because you were born with an extra pair of ears, and then deemed acceptable to be labeled as a criminal by the rest of society, simply because they see you as being beneath them," she hissed. "Then let me tell you something, Blake," Naruto said, leaning in as his tone took on a dangerous edge to it that had her shrinking back. "Out of everyone on your team, I'm the most capable of sympathizing with what you've been through. Out of all 5 of us, I know better than anyone how it feels to grow up surrounded by people who look down on you, who treat you like a disease, and actively avoid you as a result. I know how it feels to have adults lash out at you, call you derogatory names, and teach their children to act the same way, simply because you were born with something you called search control. I know how it feels to be surrounded by people who actively hate you, and to have the overwhelming feeling of wanting to lash out at them because of it. The only difference between you and I is that you had the benefit of knowing why everyone hated you." Blake could see no hint of lies in Naruto's eyes as he spoke. His words and expression all gave credence to the sincerity of his words, ensuring that she understood that everything he said was true. It piqued her curiosity, the thought of what his life must have been like, what he had been put through to lead him to understanding how she must have felt to be ousted as a furnace. She put that thought aside, however, as that wasn't what was important at the moment. "Alright, what do you want?" "I want to hear your side of the story," he replied easily. "Why? Hasn't Weiss informed you all of what the White Fang are, and how undeserving of your sympathy I am for hiding the fact that I'm a furnace?" she asked in a sarcastic tone. Her mood quickly wilted when Naruto gave her a disapproving glare, one that showed he was well beyond the point of jokes. "Weiss has given us her side of things, yes," he said diplomatically, "and I know there's more to this than what she assumes to be true. She thinks you could have and would have killed her in her sleep if given the chance." "I know this isn't true," he said quickly, seeing her move to defend herself from the accusation. "You've had plenty of opportunities but never took them. The very fact that you ran immediately after ousting yourself as a furnace tells me it was never about her. It was about you, about your past, and how you wanted to keep it secret from us. I would have told you all, eventually," she replied in a small voice. "I just wasn't ready." "You didn't trust us," he replied, watching her bow dip as her ears attempted to flatten against her scalp. "So why don't you put some effort into it by trusting me now? I came here to hear your side of things and that's what I intend to do." Reluctantly, Blake once more reiterated the story she had told to Sun several minutes ago. Unlike the blonde furnace, Naruto didn't act surprised by what he heard. Everything she said seemed to barely register with him, and the surprisingly small amount of questions he asked throughout only seemed to lend credence to this fact. By the end she was unsure of how exactly Naruto felt about everything. His expression was difficult to read and gave away nothing. At most she was able to understand, or at least assume, that he was mulling it all over in his mind. A few times she thought it looked like he might be carrying on a one-sided conversation with himself in his own mind, though she couldn't be too sure of it. Everyone had their own way of working through problems, so she didn't have any right to judge if this was his way of working through everything had just been told. "Alright, so, just to be clear, you are no longer part of the White Fang," he said. "Yes, the way I left them made that quite clear," she confirmed. "And Professor Ozpin knew all this when you came to join Beacon. He knows everything. I spoke to him personally before I was accepted." You can talk to him if you want to confirm anything. That's fine, I'll trust you on that. Weiss might want to speak with him, but that's up to her to decide, he replied. What are your plans for how you are going to handle all this? I'm planning on catching the real culprits of the act. If I can get proof that the White Fang are innocent, at least of the dust robberies happening here in Vale, then I can go back and prove Weiss wrong. What else? He prodded. What do you mean? She asked. I already have a plan. I know where they'll strike next and I'm only going to record them performing the robbery, so. That's not what I mean, he interrupted. Isn't there something else you think you should do that might be more important than proving Weiss wrong? Something to do with your team? Blake gave him a quizzical look. It was obvious all his hints were going over her head, and this only served to infuriate Naruto more. She immediately recognized this and was surprised when he fixed her with an accusatory glare, as he once more tore into her. Do you have any idea what your little stunt did to your teammates last night? To your partner? Aisha started. Yang could hardly sleep. Ruby has been beside herself, and the two of them have been persistently asking people since early this morning if they've seen you. They thought of nothing but your safety since you left. You understand that? Neither of them were concerned with the fact that you were keeping your furnace heritage from them. They were more concerned about where you were sleeping last night, if you were eating, or if you were even still alive. I honestly felt the same until I found you here, calmly sipping tea with the stowaway we met yesterday and thinking only of yourself, and of proving Weiss wrong while your friends are worried sick about you, he snarled. I didn't think. No, you didn't, he interrupted. Here, he said, sliding his scroll across the table, you left yours in our dorm when you bolted. What do you want me to do? She asked. What do you think? I want you to call Yang and Ruby. I want you to apologize for running out on them and assure them you're alright, and I want you to promise that you won't pull a stunt like this again, and will instead trust them enough to talk to them about it, before doing something so stupid and reckless like this again. Tentatively, Blake took the scroll. It opened easily enough and, after going to his contacts list, she found the names of her teammates inside. They were the only ones registered, which led to a whole host of new questions, but she kept those to herself. What happens after? She asked, wondering what Naruto might have had planned for her. After, well, go get some supplies and find a spot with a good vantage point, where we'll wait for the culprits to show up, record them in the act, and return to Beacon to hand over the evidence to Ozpin. I think we can both agree I'll use it to put the real culprits behind bars. Wait, we? She asked. Yes. You didn't think I was going to let you do this alone, did you? You can't be serious. You don't trust me enough to do this on my own. Exactly, he replied, the curt confirmation rendering her speechless. After everything that's happened, do you honestly expect me to just let you go and trust that something doesn't go wrong, that could end with you seriously injured or worse? He asked, not waiting or giving her time to come up with an answer. Call them, apologize, then he'll explain the situation, and you and I will go together. I have every intention of coming back with you, alive. I'm not about to stop now. Blake didn't say anything. Slowly, she took the scroll and pressed the button to call Yang. While he waited, listening to the conversation that soon ensued, he heard Kurama grumble something to him that he almost didn't hear. I have a bad feeling about this. If he were being honest, so did he. Dale Harbor. Naruto sat cross-legged with Hyorin laid flat across his lap. Has been sitting like that for the last hour, attuning himself to Ice Dragon's spirit, while keeping an awareness of the area around them. It was something Had worked on with his companion, but never really took the time to fully flesh it out. His main reason had been Kurama. Having a demon spirit sealed within his own body had made it easier to walk into dangerous situations, as he was confident he would be forewarned of any danger that might occur. However, after being counseled by both Hyorin and Kurama, he reluctantly agreed that dedicating some time to training up his spiritual powers would be beneficial in the long run. For one thing, it might enable him to begin locating special rifts like the one he and Kurama had traveled through. Assuming he was able to find one, he could then begin figuring out a way to utilize it towards taking him home. At the very least, he might be able to use it as a convenient method of travel all over Remnant. As of now, he was able to identify each person currently in their area by their life force, which was both interesting to him and somewhat odd. It was interesting as he could see each person's life force radiating off of them, almost like they were backlit by it. It sort of reminded him of their chakra, something which Kurama confirmed it was similar to. What he found odd was that no one's life force had the same sort of hue as everyone else's. For example, Blake's life force was a deep purple, while Sun's was light gold. Even Hyorin radiated life force from his sword form in a light blue palette. Aside from them, the dockworkers and night guards had occasionally all had the same distinct color to them. That is to say, they appeared more like they had a faint light emanating from them, but no apparent difference. Hyorin explained that this distinction was something that occurred when a person's aura was unlocked. Their life force, having now been brought to the surface, could be more distinctly identified. As a confirmation, he told him that his life force was a bright yellow, while he could see a dark palette of an orangish red mixed in with it, no doubt denoting Kurama's presence. Knowing all that, Naruto was confident he would be able to identify the culprit. Given how much dust was being shipped in, there was a good chance there would be a large group of people headed their way, making it easier to identify them. Any changes? Sun asked, returning from taking a bathroom break. Nothing yet, Blake replied as she started out at the docks, laid out flat on her stomach in a position that even Naruto would have found uncomfortable after a while. How'd the talk with your team go? Asked, attempting to make conversation. It went fine, she said in a clipped tone. So, they're glad to know you're alive. Yes, most of them anyway, she said, again attempting to end the conversation and return her focus to the docks. Sun, you're the leader of your team, correct? Naruto asked, stealing away Sun's attention and receiving a grateful glance in return. Yep, Team SSSN is named for me, he said proudly. Where are they, by the way? I can't imagine they were alright with you volunteering to wait out here all night with us. Oh, they're still at Haven. The shuttle's bringing them over Ren due to depart for another week. Wait, what? He asked, confused. They're still at Haven. As in Mistral. Yay, that's what I said, Sun confirmed. Then why aren't they here? Better yet, why aren't you back there with them? Oh, they're fine. I do things like this all the time. Honestly, none of them were surprised when I called and told them where I was. Besides, they'll be here soon enough. Naruto stared vacantly at him, unsure of how he should respond. He looked over to Blake, who was wearing a similar expression on her face, before returning his gaze to Sunday. He was still wearing a sunny, if not clueless, expression. The dude honestly had no idea what was wrong. All of a sudden Naruto started to find himself feeling guilty for how he had acted around Weiss earlier. While she may have had some adverse feelings towards the boy, he was beginning to find it more and more difficult to fault her for thinking of Sun as little more than a common criminal. How or why he was made his team's leader he doubt had ever understand. Naruto, heads up, we have incoming. Kurama's warning, well appreciated, was honestly unnecessary. The loud droning of a pair of bullheads coming their way was more than enough warning to garner his attention. Crouching down next to Blake, he looked out over the harbor and watched as the pair of vehicles touched down near the shipment crates. Pulling out his scroll, he zoomed in on the rear hatchways and waited for the occupants to begin disembarking. While he knew Blake was already recording, he had decided it would be ideal if he followed suit. It would at least be two sources of confirmation that would make it that much difficult for anyone, including Weiss, to argue against. Unfortunately, neither of them was prepared for who stepped out and into the open. Several men and women, all Fraunus, began streaming out of the bullheads. Some were armed with guns while others carried blades or clubs of different sizes. All of them, however, were dressed in identical black hoodies, and were wearing the distinctive white grim masks that set them apart as White Fang. Naruto heard the sharp intact of breath from Blake, and felt his heart drop in response. Neither of them was particularly happy to discover that Weiss' assumptions about the White Fang's involvement in the dust robberies had been proven true, and both of them had evidence supporting that fact. What then sent them for a loop was the man who sauntered out of the bullhead and out in front of the Fang. Dressed in a long white coat and black slacks, wearing a bowler hat, and smoking a cigar, there was no mistaking the iconic look of Roman Torchwick. What he was doing here or why he was working with the White Fang, he couldn't say, but it at least gave them something more to give to the police and the headmaster once they'd returned to Beacon. What's Roman Torchwick doing working with the White Fang? Blake asked in utter disbelief. Stealing dust apparently, Naruto said as he finished recording. This toast makes sense. The White Fang would never ally themselves with a human, let alone someone of Roman's reputation. That's something we'll have to leave up to the authorities to figure out. Now let's get out of here before we're spotted. Whether or not she heard him, he couldn't determine. What he did know was that Blake had vaulted off the roof, rolled when she hit the ground, and began sprinting towards the criminals currently gathered out on the docks. He cursed, wondering how she could be so reckless before he noticed Sun following suit. He groaned in frustration, hoping the guy was going to retrieve Blake before she could do something stupid, as if she hadn't already. Before doing anything else, he opened his scroll and made a quick call to his team. Hello, Ruby, it's me. Listen, where are you right now? I'm at Beacon. I've been hanging out with a new friend I made down in Vale. A new friend? Greetings, friend Uzumaki Naruto. Oh crap, it's that weird girl from yesterday. Kurama groused. Who? Hi, Orochimaru asked, having not met Penny yet. Hi Penny. Good to see you. Listen, we're at the docks and the White Fang are here. I told you the White Fang were behind the robberies, Weiss' voice cut in. Where's Blake? I want to see the look on her face when I say I told you so. She's gone to confront them along with Sun. They're not here alone. Roman Torchwick is working with them as well. Roman Torchwick? Why? Ruby asked. I don't know and I honestly don't care. Go inform the headmaster. I'm going to see if I can get Sun and Blake to safety before they do something stupid. Alright, Team NWBYR is on the way. Ruby proudly proclaimed. No, Ruby, don't. The call ended before he could tell her to stay put. He started his reflection for a moment, an expression of disbelief staring back at him. Somehow, the fact that none of them had stopped to consider the ramifications of their actions before coming to their aid was more troubling than had first thought. Hopefully, Weiss would go inform Ozpin of what was happening before Ruby managed to drag her off. As much as he was looking forward to hearing her spout how she'd been right about the White Fang all along, had happily endured, so long as his teammates got out of this alive. Our teammates are a bunch of idiots, Kurama pointed out. No, they just mean well, he replied. One of them just jumped off the roof to confront a group of terrorists, and the rest are heading here to do the same, Kurama countered. I never said they were the brightest bunch, Naruto replied. Roman wasn't quite sure what he was meant to make of his current situation. Honestly, the last thing he had expected was to have a hunter's blade pressed up against his throat, while also listening to her sad, pathetic attempts to persuade her fellow Fronis to stop aiding a known criminal. Please, they're terrorists. These animals were already flagged as criminals the moment they donned the hoodies and masks, if not the moment they stepped foot into a White Fang recruitment rally. The fact that they were helping him steal some dust was merely par for the course. At least with this little venture they'd accomplished more in their fight against the STC in one night than they had all year. All Roman was doing was providing them with ample motivation and leadership. Gods knew these animals could lead a herd of lemmings off a cliff even if they tried. Excuse me, but who are you, kitty cat? Roman asked, his finger slipping down to the trigger on melodic cudgel. Shut up. I don't want to hear a word from someone like you, she hissed. As opposed to what, the Fronis extremists currently surrounding us? He asked. They are a known criminal, she spat. And they're an infamous terrorist organization, he countered. Honestly, considered tame by comparison. What gives the right to claim that you're better than us? Because you're not a Fronis. How about because I've built my reputation on never taking an innocent life, or kidnapping people or executing prisoners and sending recordings of me doing it to their families, he replied, taking pleasure in the fact that she flinched with each point he made. Face facts, kitten, I cultivated my reputation by stealing everything I could lay my hands on, without ever putting my victims' lives in harm's way. A thief who steals is tolerated. A thief who kills is hunted, and I like my odds of survivability more with the former option. Before Blake could retort, Roman angled his cane between their legs and pulled the trigger. A flare flew from the end, exploding behind the girl and throwing them both forward. Roman managed to collect himself, rising back to his feet and aiming another shot at the downed hunters. Had walked away mostly unscathed. The foolish girl had taken the brunt of the blast with her oar, ensuring had hardly lost any while she was still recovering. Despite the proximity of the attack, Blake managed to recover enough to spring back to her feet and dodge the next attack Roman sent her way. The blast missed, exploding dangerously close to the dust containers, but Roman could carry the way. So long as she was cooked well done, had be more than happy to set off a few fireworks. Quit standing around, you stupid animals, and attack. Roman's order seemed to go unnoticed by the pack of animals had brought along for the job. With a snarl, he turned to threaten them with melodic cudgel, only to see the White Fang already engaged with another Fronis, this one blonde-haired monkey by the looks of him. He was twirling a bow staff around which, when had found himself surrounded, had broken apart into a pair of nunchucks. What happened next was both confusing and surprising when shotgun blasts rang out as the boy fired on the terrorists, showing that his weapon was, like every huntsman weapon had encountered before, also a gun, or rather shotguns in this kid's instance. And I thought a gardening tool turned sniper rifle was bizarre, he grumbled. Reaching into his jacket pocket, Roman pulled out a small fire dust crystal. Giving it a gentle toss, he watched it slide across the ground towards the unsuspecting huntsman and his opponents. With a small smile, he popped off a shot from his cane, and watched as the boy's eyes nearly flew out of his skull when the crystal exploded. Unsurprisingly, the boy survived, thanks in most part to his oar, but the White Fang were less fortunate. Only a handful of the terrorists had their oar unlocked, let alone the training needed to manipulate it, and the others were simply civilian volunteers who had gotten in way over their heads. Needless to say, there would be casualties to report, though had shift the blame onto the huntsman for that one. Raig. Blake hollered as she attempted to take Roman from behind. He scoffed, easily dodging out of the way and smacking her across the face for good measure. Someone would need to teach this girl that surprise attacks work best when their intended target was caught unawares. Injured and with her oar dangerously low, Blake fared about as well as one could expect. Several easily parried moves that were instantly countered by Roman soon found her laid out on the ground next to an unconscious son. Hurting, both in her body and her pride, Blake could only stare up at the business end of Roman's cane as he loomed over her. It's been fun, kitty cat, but this is where we part ways, he replied. Blake clenched her eyes shut, waiting for the telltale feeling of searing pain, before the backdrop of nothingness, that would either follow with unconsciousness or death. She heard Roman's cane fire, and then felt something cold rush into the air. For a moment she thought she was dead, and that the cold she felt was from all of the heat leaving her body at once. It was only after she ventured to open her eyes that she found a large wall of ice erected between herself and Roman, along with the dust round had fired embedded halfway through. Her thoughts immediately flew to Weiss, and for once she was grateful to think that she had been nearby, ready to intervene. It was only when she glanced over that she realized she had been wrong, but was no less grateful. Seriously, where do you kids keep coming from? Torchwick groaned as he took in Naruto's form. Isn't it past your bedtime? Funny, I was about to ask if your mother knew you were running around wearing her mascara. Naruto shot back. No, but yours is about to be notified of your untimely demise, Roman replied as he leveled melodic cudgel with his head. Naruto had, for the most part, opted to hang back and let Blake handle the situation. His reasoning behind this had mostly come from the technique had learned from Hyorin Mare, which had allowed him to see that a large majority of the White Fang didn't even have their aura unlocked. That coincided with why certain members had guns, and the others were carrying melee weapons. Anyone who had their aura unlocked was used as a bullet sponge, while the others would pick off their opponents from afar, allowing their colleagues to get up close and finish them off. It was a sound strategy, in theory, but not something that would fare well when confronted by huntsmen, even if they were just students. For that reason alone had decided to sit back and watch. Out of everyone present, Roman was the most dangerous, and Blake had wisely taken him unawares. Then Shed started monologuing, a foolish mistake that Roman quickly took advantage of. That had been his cue to intervene and, as soon as sun went down as well, had already unsheathed Hyorin Mare and had a technique cue to unleash. He had thankfully managed to erect a wall of ice between Blake and Roman, just as he fired. The sudden interruption had caught the thief off guard, but, from the way he acted, he was too seasoned to be taken advantage of so easily. After a brief exchange, Roman leveled his cane at Naruto's head and fired. A red flare erupted from the end, sailing through the air and nailing him clean in the face. Naruto! Blake screamed. The flare hit its mark dead on before it exploded. The flash was bright enough that, for a moment, everyone was blinded and unable to see the smoke that began to dissipate when the shadow clone was destroyed. Where the hell did he go? Roman asked the moment the flare cleared, and he was able to see the world once more. Even the White Fang were confused. Looking around for any sign of the young man, they didn't notice the figures who came up from behind and began attacking the terrorists. There was some momentary confusion as a new group of assailants, all of whom were dressed in the same White Fang uniforms, began attacking the ones who had come with Roman. Confusion and panic erupted as it looked like the White Fang had not only doubled in number, but had started fighting each other. "What are you animals doing?" Roman yelled. Rough cursing and cries of surprise were the only answer. No one knew what had happened or who was fighting him. All they knew was that a group of people dressed like them had somehow snuck into the docks with the intention of fighting them. It was enough to draw everyone's attention, including Blake's, as she wasn't certain what to make of it all. She nearly yelped in surprise when a pair of arms pulled her up off the ground and began carrying her towards the shipping crates. Too weak to fight back, she looked up into her would-be rescuer kidnapper's face and felt her jaw drop when she saw it was Naruto. A quick glance over showed a second Naruto, this one cradling Sun in his arms, as they made a run for cover. Then Naruto. "What? How? There's two of you," she yelped. "Don't worry about it," he replied, rounding a corner. "There were those people fighting the White Fang, and why are they dressed like them?" "Don't worry about it," he said as he set her down. "What do you mean don't worry about it? I just saw you get shot in the head only to have you carrying me to safety a moment later, while the White Fang began fighting amongst themselves." "I'm fairly certain you owed an explanation," she demanded. She soon realized her little outburst had been a huge mistake as Naruto turned on her and gave her a withering glare. "You deserve an explanation. How about giving me an explanation for why you jumped off the damn roof and ran to confront Torchwick?" She started, unable to come up with an explanation the moment she was called out. "Whatever happened to getting video evidence of the culprits and leaving? We agreed that we won't get involved and then you went and did this. That was before I knew who it was. Things are different now." "Why?" "Because the White Fang and Torchwick working together and now y'all have to admit to Weiss that she was right and you were wrong." "That's not it at all," she tried to argue. "It looked a lot like that from where I was standing, right up to the point when you and Sun were defeated by Torchwick and the Fang." "They're being misled," she countered. "They look pretty compliant to me, especially when they started attacking you both, even though you're furnace too." Once more Blake found herself without an explanation. It didn't matter, though, as a massive explosion began ripping through the air. They ducked down, surprised by the sudden impact. It was a moment before Naruto looked up, a haunted look on his face that said he knew something she didn't. Sneaking a glance back out onto the docks, they could see Roman holding his cane up and pointed at the storage containers. The White Fang, at least those who had come out with him, were sprawled out on the ground before him. Several of them were groaning with a few cradling limbs that had severe burns. Their numbers had returned to normal with the imposters who had shown up out of nowhere having disappeared all at once. "What happened?" Blake asked shakily. Roman intentionally blew up one of the containers. He didn't even care that the White Fang members would be caught in the crossfire, he replied, sounding as if he knew exactly what events had transpired. "We need to get out of here now. Can you walk?" "Why, yeah," she replied. "Alright, we're going to try and make a run for the warehouses. Don't look back for any reason, just stay focused on getting to safety." Blake nodded, bracing herself against the storage container as she struggled to her feet. Naruto took Sun in his arms, cradling him as they made their way to the far end of the stack. While they were out of Torchwick's view, it was only a matter of time before either he or the White Fang grunts caught sight of them. Hopefully by then they'd have made it to safety. From there he could send Blake off with Sun while he held off their pursuers until reinforcements arrived. He had enough chakra to do that, not to mention some of the techniques Hyorin Meru had been teaching him. With a quick glance around to make sure the coast was clear, they started their perilous journey. With Blake hobbling up front, Naruto sparred a glance back to see if they were being followed. Thankfully no one was tailing them. The White Fang had returned to one of the bullheads, and were currently using the loading cable to latch onto some of the storage containers. Whatever was inside must have been valuable, or so he assumed. He didn't care at this point. He had the lives of two people that were currently more valuable to him than whatever it was the White Fang and Torchwick were stealing. Returning his gaze forward, he could see they were about halfway to the warehouses. He smiled, glad to see things had worked out so far, but was wary of anything that might suddenly swoop in to ruin his day. It didn't take long to appear as a third unaccounted for bullhead began flying towards the docks. A small part of him prayed that it was the police, but when his searchlights came on and zeroed in on them, he knew they could be friendly. Blake, move. Before she could react, Naruto sprang forward, tackling Blake from behind and shoving her forward. Several reinforcements had arrived, but they weren't theirs. The searchlight continued to move with them, as did the sound of gunfire and exploding concrete. Naruto knew he'd be able to survive the onslaught, but Blake and Sun would be riddled with holes if they didn't keep moving. He was certain they'd both depleted their aura during their fight, which meant they were as good as dead if they didn't make it to cover. Naruto, behind you. Kurama warned. Blake, take him. He instructed, not wasting time to ask and throwing Sun into Blake's arms. The girl looked surprised as Sun was tossed into her arms unceremoniously. Whatever protests she might have had were quickly forgotten as she noticed something coming in from behind her team leader. With Hyorin Meru in hand, Naruto turned to confront whatever was headed his way and balked as a large red flare came hurtling towards his face. Not having a shadow clone handy to take the attack for him, and knowing Blake and Sun would be caught in the crossfire should he dodge, Naruto instead braced himself for the attack, feeling Kurama lend him some of his chakra for good measure. At the moment of impact, he felt heat wash over him as the explosion propelled him backwards. He hit the ground hard, rolling with the impact until he came to an abrupt stop. Groaning, he started to pull himself to his feet, only to find Torchwick's cane pressed into his face with the targeting reticle sighted for his head. Not bad, kid, but not good enough. This is where your story ends. Don't worry, though, it'll make this quick and painless. Roman squeezed the trigger, and Naruto squeezed his eyes shut in expectation. He jumped when he heard the gunshot, but soon realized it hadn't come from Roman, given that he hadn't felt any pain, and that he was still alive to boot. Cracking an eye open, he saw Roman had taken several steps backward and was missing his signature hat. Moments later, a wall of ice, not high rinmers, erupted in front of him, and effectively blocked off any further assault or retaliation from Torchwick. Get away from my partner, Weiss yelled. Our partner, Ruby corrected. Whatever, Weiss snipped. Roman cursed, retreating to one of the remaining bullheads as Ruby began pelting him with sniper fire. She managed to land a couple of hits that caused his aura to flare, but before long he was inside and had the door closed behind him. As they took off into the air, the two other bullheads rose to flank them and offer support. It looked like they might make a clean getaway when Penny stepped into view. Hey, it's the robot girl from yesterday, Kurama pointed out. The who? Hyorin Meru asked, uncertain whom they were talking about. Before either he or Naruto could answer, several swords flew out from her backpack and began circling around in the air. With her arms outstretched, she began to aim at one of the bullheads that was lagging behind. Before he could ask what she was doing, green energy began to pull in the center of the swords, before it shot out in a bright, powerful beam. It flew across the water, slicing through the bullhead like a hot knife through butter, and severed it in two. Naruto watched as both pieces, and presumably, its passengers collapsed into the water in a manner that made it quite clear no one was swimming away from the wreck unscathed. That girl is not human, Hyorin Meru pointed out. Oh, you think? Kurama snarled back. Naruto didn't say anything. He just stared at the girl, android, whatever she was, in question. The entire time the warm smile she had on her face never faltered, something which unnerved him now that he saw it. She must have felt his eyes on her as her gaze turned to him. With a cheery smile she gave him a wave, when he didn't return. While had been suspicious of this girl before, now he was certain there was something seriously wrong with that child. How on Remnant anyone would allow someone to walk around when they were carrying weapons on them, of that destructive power, was beyond him. He didn't have long to think about it as a red blur sped his way, when he was quick to receive upon noticing. Naruto, you're alright, I'm so glad, Ruby said, giving him a tight hug. Yay, we made it out of there somehow, he said, patting the girl's head. I must admit, I'm rather impressed. Roman Torchwick is no slouch, and yet you managed to hold your own against him. Then again you managed to hold your own against Pyrrha, so I shall be surprised. Whatever they taught you in your village must have been top-notch, Weiss said as she strode towards him. I'm guessing that the fact you two are here means you notified Professor Ozpin of what was going on? He asked. Before Weiss answered, the blaring of sirens sounded from nearby, signaling that the police had arrived on the scene. As well as the police, she replied proudly. Good, Blake and Son need medical attention anyways, and I have evidence of woes behind the dust robberies. Yay, we saw Torchwick, Ruby pointed out. And the White Fang, Naruto added, causing Ruby to gawk in surprise. I see, Weiss said thoughtfully. Well, I suppose I owe my teammate an apology. Really? Naruto asked with obvious disbelief. Even though she was wrong. What do you mean? I blame the White Fang solely for the dust robberies. The fact that Roman Torchwick was not only involved but masterminding them changes things drastically. In any event, it shows that there's more to these robberies than I had first assumed, and that I was as wrong to blame the White Fang for them as Blake was to defend them. That is surprisingly mature of you, Naruto replied. I've had a lot of time to think about what Yao said, and about how I've acted, she replied. I'll admit, there are some areas that could use improvement, specifically when it comes to my relationship with others. Speaking of, we'd better go find Professor Osborn. I'm sure he'll be glad to know our team is back together and all in one piece, he said. Trespassing. Property damage. Destruction of a privately owned company's product. Not to mention the blatant endangerment of the lives of Miss Belladonna and Mr. Wukong. I should hope you understand the severity of your actions and the near-fatal consequences that nearly befell you all as a result. Miss Goodwitch lectured him as he sat across from Ozpin in his office, while Glinda walked around Naruto's back. To be fair, those were all Roman Torchwick's doing, Miss Goodwitch, Naruto pointed out. In response, Glinda gave him a withering glare, one that had him slowly sliding down into his seat. Well, I do agree that the destruction of the Vale City docks and the loss of so much dust is solely Roman's doing. I must point out that you were there illegally as well, and through your actions put the life of one of your teammates as well as her friend at risk, Mr. Uzumaki, Osborn said calmly. What were you even thinking, rushing out there to confront Roman Torchwick on your own? Glinda asked, her eyes boring into him as she awaited his answer. I figured you won't be too difficult to handle. I've faced worse people before and came out alright, he admitted. You could have been killed, Glinda pointed out. Won't be the first time, Naruto said offhandedly. Naruto soon regretted saying that. Glinda looked down at him in disbelief, while Osborn stared at him from across his desk, his mug hovering inches from his face. Could you please elaborate on that comment, Naruto? Osborn said, putting his drink down. He glanced between the two and, after realizing there was no backing out of it, let out a tired sigh before explaining. One of the first missions I took on as a kid for my village entailed 2 of my friends, as well as a veteran of our village, escorting an engineer back home. He was in charge of building a bridge for his village that would hopefully bring renewed trade to their home and save them from dying out. How do you mean? The village itself had fallen on hard times. A local crime lord had taken over and effectively ran out anyone from the village leaders to authority figures who might have stood against him. He killed quite a few of them and even made public examples of the victims to stamp out any uprisings that might occur. Unfortunate but not uncommon for Mistral, Osborn replied. Was this someone you came into conflict with during your mission? Yes and no, Naruto replied. They had hired an assassin named Zabuza Momochi to hunt down and kill the man we were escorting. We came into conflict with him on 2 occasions. The second time found us fighting both Zabuza and his adopted son Haku. The conflict resulted in their deaths as well as numerous injuries to myself, my teammates, and our instructor. The crime lord was the one to attempt to finish off Zabuza when he failed to kill us, but the assassin turned the tables on him and killed him instead before succumbing to his injuries. What remained of his forces were subsequently run out of the village. They've been independent and recovering quite well ever since. I see, Osborn replied, his expression remaining stoic, while Glinda's was the very definition of mortification, less so by what had occurred, and more so by what Naruto had undoubtedly experienced. I must admit, I hadn't expected you to have such a tumultuous childhood. Even our older students can't claim to have faced such obstacles, at least not until after they've graduated. What sort of village would even allow or teach their children to expect to fight such people? Glinda asked in quiet disbelief. I lived in Mistral before coming here, Miss Goodwitch. Bandits, crime lords, and corrupt politics are the norm there, Naruto pointed out. Our village leaders simply wanted us to be prepared for what was outside the borders of our village. We could live our lives completely sheltered, never believing that the dangers of the outside world would find their way inside. Indeed, Osborn agreed. Well, all things considered, I believe we could let you off with a firm warning and a slap on the wrist. Osborn. Glinda choked in shock. Mr. Uzumaki has been through a great deal, Glinda, both in the last 24 hours, and well beyond even our own scope, Osborn replied. I doubt there's any punishment we could come up with that would be effective at teaching him a lesson in responsibility or humility that he hasn't already experienced before. I suppose you have a point, she grudgingly admitted. If you have nothing more to add, then you'll release you to your team. I'm sure they're eager to see you again, and y'all no doubt want to visit Miss Belladonna to confirm that she's recovering well. She's my first stop after this, sir, Naruto confirmed. Then don't let me keep you, Osborn said, waving him off. Naruto nodded, quickly rising from his seat and retreating to the elevator. As soon as it had closed and begun to descend, Glinda turned to Osborn with a concerned and worried look. Revelations on Mr. Uzumaki's childhood aside, I don't understand why he would lie to us so blatantly about the events that occurred. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Glinda, Osmond said, feigning ignorance as he took a sip from his now lukewarm mug. You know exactly what I mean. The video recording he provided us along with the surveillance footage from the docks both confirmed that it was Miss Belladonna who initiated the attack on Torchwick, not him. I don't understand why you would accept his statement as fact when it's blatantly clear that Blake Belladonna is at fault. Her actions nearly resulted in her death, as well as that of another student from another kingdom's academy. Despite all of that, you're choosing to waive the matter when her actions would have resulted in her expulsion. And yet I didn't. Do you know why, Glinda? Osmond asked. Without waiting for her answer, he continued, it's true that the evidence points to Miss Belladonna being the one at fault, and she should be the one receiving punishment. However, it's also clear that her absence from her team following the reveal of her being a furnace led to a rift being formed. If we were to follow through with punishing her to the full extent of her actions, we would no doubt cause that rift to increase, perhaps to the point where they are unable to function cohesively at all. In the end, our actions could cause more harm than good. Not only that, but there's also the matter of Miss Belladonna's future to consider as well. She came to us after defecting from the White Fang. Her decision to come here, knowing she could very well have been incarcerated due to her past actions and affiliations, shows a great deal of faith in her belief that she can trust us to help her redeem herself of her past actions, as well as provide a better future for her people. To expel her now and throw her out into the streets would be doing her no favors. She spent the last 5 years as an active member of the White Fang. I've little doubt they'd be willing to take her back, especially after recent events, and I doubt she'd be willing to return to them. Not only that, but, well, I've no doubt her parents would be more than willing to welcome their daughter home. Whether or not she will have the courage to face them after all this time is another matter entirely. While I acknowledge your reservations to all of this, I'd much rather retain her here where we can at least steer her towards a better future, instead of tossing her out into the greater world, where she may be preyed upon by forces with more nefarious designs. Glinda let out a disgruntled sigh of frustration. She hated to admit it, but Osmond was right. That didn't excuse the migraine she was developing from the blatant favoritism he was showing his students, however. I still think we shouldn't have allowed them off so lightly after the damage they caused. I don't think we'll need to worry about that. Mr. Uzumaki has already his willingness as a leader to take responsibility for the actions of his teammates. I've little doubt he'll also be bringing her to task for her actions as well, along with the emotional turmoil she put her teammates through, he replied. As expected, Naruto was met at the door to the infirmary by both Ruby and Yang. The sisters pestered him for information regarding Blake, and the headmaster's decision regarding whether or not she would be allowed to stay in Beacon. He quickly assured him that no one was being expelled, something which helped greatly to calm them down, and he promised to tell them everything after had a moment to speak with Blake. As soon as he stepped foot inside, he was surprised to not only see Blake and Weiss sitting together, but to witness them having a civil conversation. Both girls were even smiling and, dare he say it, laughing at something Blake had said. He honestly had to take a moment to pinch himself just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. "Oh, Naruto, you're back," Weiss said, rising to meet him as he strode forward. "How did your meeting with the headmaster go?" "As well as can be expected," he said, eyeing the two girls. "We had a chance to talk," Weiss said, noticing the confusion on his face. "We took the chance to apologize for how we'd acted and treated one another in the past. It was unfair, and we've been taking what time that we have to learn more about one another and improve our relationship." "I'm glad to hear that," he said with a grateful nod. "I was hoping to speak with Blake for a minute. There are some things we need to discuss." "Of course," she replied. As she rose from her seat, she gave Blake's hand a reassuring squeeze. The girl gave her a smile and nodded back before turning her eyes to Naruto. As he exchanged seats with Weiss, he saw the girl shoot him a sympathetic and almost pleading look. He merely nodded in return, knowing it was her way of asking him to go easy on Blake, before she left them alone in the infirmary. "So, how exactly did your meeting with the headmaster go?" "And don't give the as well as can be expected excuse you gave the others," Blake said. "Well, I knew it was going to be bad when Miss Goodwitch started naming off all the damages we caused, while also blocking the only viable exit," he replied. "To be fair, Torchwick was responsible for most of that," Blake pointed out. "Yay, I mentioned that little detail, and she gave me a look that said she wasn't very pleased by my answer." Blake laughed, causing Naruto to do the same. It felt genuine and relaxed, which was a nice change from how things had been before. Now that things were out in the open and Blake wasn't trying to run away, they were starting to see a more natural side to the girl, one that didn't hide behind her bow and books. "So, how are you doing?" he asked once had stopped laughing. "About as well as can be expected," she quipped, and, when he gave her an annoyed look, she laughed and replied, "I'm fine, really. A little sore, both in body and in pride, but I'm still alive and breathing, so I can't complain." "That's good to hear. How's son doing?" "Better than me. He was discharged earlier and has supposed to meet with the headmaster later to be assigned to his temporary dorm for his team. No one was made aware that he was going to be coming here early, not even Headmaster Lionheart at Haven. Has going to have a lot of explaining to do as well as a few lectures from them, both to sit through as a result. Bet he wishes he was still unconscious, Naruto joked. Speaking of the headmaster, Blake said, changing the subject, did he mention how long I have? The question was an odd one, to say the least. However, judging from her tone and the way her ears drooped down along with her downcast gaze, it was a simple matter for Naruto to figure out what she was alluding to. Not long, I think. The nurse said you could be released later today, Naruto replied with a smirk. That's not what I mean and you know it, she replied, annoyed. Then you're going to have to be more specific, he said. How long? She started, taking a moment to choke back tears before she continued. How long do I have before I'm expected to vacate the premises? You mean how long until you are expected to leave Beacon, he confirmed, watching as she slowly nodded her head in reply. Well, assuming you don't do anything nearly this self-destructive anytime soon, another 4 years at most. His gaze wiped around to fix him with a searing glare that showed how little she cared for his joke. I'm being serious, Naruto, she hissed. As am I, he replied. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? He asked. I've been expelled from Beacon, haven't I? She asked. Not as far as I'm aware, he replied. Though, if you want to rectify that, I'm sure we can go talk with the headmaster. No? She shouted, blushing a little at her outburst before clearing her throat and saying, no, we don't need to do that. Alright, he replied, watching her closely as he waited for the expected response. I just assumed, after everything that happened, that I'd be asked to leave, she replied. I wouldn't have been surprised either if the headmaster thought you were the one responsible. Blake's gaze quickly turned to shock as his words slowly registered with the young woman. She looked at him with obvious disbelief, somehow expecting this to all be part of some elaborate joke that he was waiting to spring on her, when she least expected the horrible punchline. To be fair, it wasn't difficult to understand why she might feel this way, given her overall upbringing and background. It was only after a few moments when Naruto didn't say anything to contradict his earlier statement that the girl finally began to realize he was being serious. Who does he think is to blame for what happened? She asked cautiously. We both agreed that Roman Torchwick deserved about 90% of the blame, given that he was the one to blow up the docks, Naruto replied, and the remaining 10% is on me. What? She yelled, nearly jumping out of her bed to throttle him. How could you? Why would you? What were you thinking? I was thinking that I didn't want to lose a valuable member of our team, and, considering that I'm your team leader, it made sense that I should shoulder the blame for not reacting fast enough to stop you from doing something incredibly stupid and dangerous. But she started, attempting to argue with him, but finding herself unable to think of anything viable to use as leverage. You should have let me take the blame. Even if it meant I would be expelled, it wouldn't have harmed you or the others. You would all still be able to stay in Beacon, you would just be knocked to a regular team of 4. You don't think your expulsion would have harmed the others? Naruto asked with a cocked eyebrow. Ruby would have been crushed that she wasn't able to do something to help you, especially because she considers you to be more of a friend than a teammate. Yang would have been livid. She's your partner after all, and despite how she may act, she really cares about you. The fact that she was willing to look for you all weekend long should be proof of that. All that said, even you and Weiss have settled your differences. I can certainly say your relationship is off to a better start, given how you two were talking and laughing when I came in. Knowing all that, do you honestly think your absence won't matter to us? Lake opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't think of anything to say. With a downcast gaze, she looked away guiltily. I don't know what your life was like in the Fang, but here you are a member of Team NWBRY. That means we don't give up on one another, and we don't leave anyone behind if we can help it. Besides, Team NWRY don't exactly roll off the tongue, he joked, earning a small laugh from Blake. Speaking of our pasts, are you going to explain to me what happened at the docks? I saw you rush to engage Torchwick, get shot in the face before disappearing and reappearing with a whole bunch of people who were dressed up as White Fang. You can tell me not to worry about it or claim it's your semblance, but I'd find it hard to believe that someone has 2 semblances, especially when one of them is very similar to my own. Naruto stared at her for a long moment, silently considering how much he should reveal to the girl. He couldn't tell her everything. There were things that would no doubt be too difficult to believe outright, and even if he demonstrated his abilities to her, that would no doubt lead to more questions. Still, that didn't mean he couldn't reveal some things to her. Naruto, what are you doing? Kurama asked with obvious concern. To build trust I need to show trust, was his reply. Glancing around the infirmary to make sure no one else was around or within earshot, he scooted himself closer to Blake. She was already giving him a suspicious look, and the moment he drew closer her eyes narrowed. What I'm about to tell you stays between us, he said in a hushed voice. Naruto, I'm serious, Blake. You can't tell anyone else on our team about this. I promise to let them all know at an appropriate time, but for now, I need to keep the number of people down to a minimum. She stared at him for a moment, silently considering her words. After a while, though, she gave him a nod in agreement, though her suspicious look remained. You're right to assume that what I did last night wasn't part of a semblance, he confirmed, watching as her eyes widened in confirmation. It's a technique that I learned when I wasn't yet ready to start performing missions for my village. What is it? she asked, curious. Before I answer, I need to ask if you know what chakra is. Chakra? She said. You mean like the life energy that some mystics believe is tied to certain aspects of the soul or something like that? Close, but what I was taught is a little different, he said. He then took a moment to explain the concept that Sakura had instructed him on when he was first learning how to climb trees. Blake followed along, nodding every now and then, but still maintaining a suspicious look as he spoke. He then moved on to the shadow clone technique, telling her it was performed and showing her the various hand signs. Giving her a fair warning beforehand, he then wove the signs together, and a handful of clone copies of himself appeared standing around the perimeter of her bed. She nearly jumped out of her skin when they appeared, looking at them and then him in bewilderment. When she said nothing for a while, he further demonstrated their versatility by changing individual clones to resemble members of their team, then members of Team J and PR, and finally ended with turning them into white fang grunts before dismissing them, watching, and hoping their smoke won't set off the fire alarms. So, that's essentially how I managed to trick Roman into thinking the white fang had turned on one another. Any questions? He asked. For a while Blake didn't say anything. She simply stared off into space where the clones had been, her eyes wide from surprise. Blake, teach me, she said quietly. What? Teach me your ways, she said, grabbing by his shirt and yanking him close. I want to learn everything. Whoa, Blake, slow down. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm not even sure you understand what you're asking. You're a ninja, right? She asked. Shinobi, he corrected. Same thing, she replied. It's really not, he countered. I want you to teach me how to do that. I want to learn everything so I can be just like you. It's been my dream since I was a little girl. I'm not sure we're operating on the same wavelength here. Where exactly did you get this fascination with ninjas from? He asked. Have you ever read the book series Ninjas of Love? She asked with some slight embarrassment. You mean those smut novels? It's not smut. She snapped, blushing when she heard her outburst. Blake, he groaned, you can think that what I was taught resembles anything you've read in it. I know, I just thought it might be useful to know, she said, avoiding looking him in the eyes as she spoke. I don't know if I even can. Not that I won't, he quickly said when she gave him a pleading glance, only that there's no evidence to suggest the people of your world can even utilize chakra. People of my world? She asked curiously. Well, long story short, my village isn't from around here, he said, receiving a cocked head and questioning look from him in response. Thing is, chakra may be something that's unique to my people, just as aura is unique to yours. I suppose, she said cautiously. Speaking of, what is your semblance anyway? It's obviously not those shadow clones, and I'm guessing now the ice walls you've been able to use against both Pyrrha and Torchwick aren't related to it either. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I never had my aura unlocked, he admitted. She stared at him in disbelief, expecting him to say he was joking at any moment and start laughing. When he didn't say anything and only continued to stare at her, did she finally realize he was being serious. You are enrolled at a huntsman academy and were trained by ninjas, Shinobi. And you don't have your aura unlocked? She asked, exasperated. It was never something I needed to worry about before. Then how have you been participating in combat class or sparring against Pyrrha? The machines monitor your aura levels, she pointed. I've been using my chakra to manipulate the machines into thinking it's my aura instead, he admitted. You what now? Chakra can be very versatile if you know how to manipulate it. It can even be depleted and replenished just like aura. I understand that, but you can't continue being a student here without having your aura unlocked, she said, scooting herself into a sitting position. Blake, what are you doing? What does it look like? I'm going to unlock your aura for you. Are you sure that's a good idea? You're still recovering, he pointed out. I've mostly recovered from my injuries last night. Unlocking your aura won't have any detrimental effects on me. Now hold still, I need to concentrate, she instructed. Doing as he was told, Naruto sat perfectly still as Blake closed her eyes and placed her hand on his chest. She began reciting words and phrases that seemed rather strange to him. After a short time, though, he began to feel something inside of him beginning to surge outwards. For a moment he thought it might be his chakra or karama, but this felt distinctively different from the two. When Blake finished, the surge of energy soon erupted, enveloping his whole form, and leaving him feeling energized and stronger. Looking himself over, he could see a faint yellow glow that emanated from his form before it slowly began to disappear, though the effects had felt earlier remained. There, it's unlocked now. Wow, this feels incredible, he said. Yeah, I'll get used to it, she said with a chuckle. It was strange though. What do you mean? Well, I'm not sure what it was. When I was unlocking your aura, it felt like there was someone else present. Someone else? He asked. Almost like there was a second soul inside you, she said. I'm probably just feeling some after effects from the unlocking process, she surmised. That must be it, Naruto said nervously. So, now I have my aura unlocked. Yep, and now you need someone to teach you, she said as she gave him a meaningful look. I take it that's your way of offering to teach me? He asked. More like making a deal with you. If I promise to teach you how to use your aura, then you can teach me how to unlock and use my chakra. Sound like a deal? You do realize there's no certainty or guarantee that you even have aura or will be able to utilize anything I teach you, he pointed out. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you don't have anything meaningful you can pass on to me, right? She asked, extending her hand. I suppose not, he replied, taking her hand and giving it a firm shake. I look forward to our first lesson, sensei, he said. Beacon training room. Sir, Naruto said, watching Blake's hands as she shifted them to copy the sign she had been shown. He looked at her hands, inspecting them to ensure they were as accurate as possible. Both hands, one laid on top of the other, with the thumb set between the pinky and ring finger. He nodded, satisfied, before moving on to the next one. Tatsu, he said, waiting patiently as Blake once more moved her fingers to copy what she had seen. Inspecting it, he saw her fingers were set intertwined with one another, her pinky set together and pointing straight down, while her thumb sat on top with her left thumb sitting on the right. He nodded his satisfaction, noting the girl's small smile at having been praised, before moving on to the next hand sign. Ne. Tori. Mi. Rushi. On and on it went, Naruto calling out each of the hand seals, while Blake took the time to accurately imitate them, before receiving a nod of approval from her sensei. It had only been a week since Blake had been released from the infirmary. Despite her injuries, the girl had proved surprisingly resilient and had recovered in record time. Well, record time when compared to what he was used to. Despite having spent almost 2 years in this world, the wonders of Aura were still a marvel to him. Naruto, of course, had a rather robust healing factor, but when you had one of the tailed beasts sealed within you as an infant, the strengths and advantages such creatures had enjoyed and employed when loose upon his world was something the Jinchurikis were also able to enjoy. Unfortunately, it made explaining how he was able to shrug off serious injuries without having his aura unlocked rather difficult to explain. As such, between instructing Blake on how to correctly mold her fingers to make the various hand seals, had also made time to properly learn how to utilize his aura, something which he found was quite similar to using chakra and completely different all at the same time. Blake had been all too eager to learn everything there was to be a shinobi. Where getting the girl up before 7 had been a pain before, had quickly found himself being rudely awakened by her at 4 by the girl in question. The worst part about was that she hadn't done anything to wake him, per se. Rather, his sixth sense had alerted him to the fact that he was being watched and immediately woke him as a result. He had then been greeted by a pair of amber eyes that were staring at him in the dark. Too groggy to make an educated guess, his lizard brain had kicked into high gear instead. What followed was a chaotic circus of Naruto grabbing a spare kunai he kept under his pillow, before launching it at the pair of eyes in the dark. Blake just barely managed to dodge the attack, leaping into the air before landing on Ruby's bunk swinging precariously in the air. Startled from her sleep, she and Blake tumbled and fell in a flurry of sheets, landing on top of Weiss who had been woken up by Naruto's cry of alarm. Yang, who had been sleeping through all of this, had it the worst when Naruto's poorly aimed kunai struck one of the books keeping her bunk held up. One loose book was all it took to bring the whole thing crashing down to the ground in an avalanche of books, limbs, and wood. It took them a good half hour to rein themselves in and get the full story, one in which Naruto more or less admitted to having promised to train with Blake in the morning, but having failed to hammer out a decent time for them to start. By the end, they were too tired to go back to sleep, and reluctantly began getting ready for the day, though not without giving the furnace a few seething glares to show how irritated they were for waking them all up, just because she was eager to begin her training with Naruto. Naruto had insisted that they start their training after their classes ended for the day. This was dual-purposed as it acted as a punishment for the girl by making her wait the entire day before she could start learning something fun and exciting, at least. That's how she viewed it, while also circumventing any problems their team might have with them getting up at an early hour and making too much noise. It was a win-win situation, one Blake could readily argue with, especially when Fate made her put her bunk back together, after it came cascading down on top of them. Alright, your hand seals look good. Yeah, I've done well to memorize them so quickly, he praised. Can we start learning how to unlock my chakra now? Blake asked eagerly. Not yet, he said with an apologetic grimace. Now, we're going to test your memory and reflexes. I'm going to call out a sign, and you need to make it as quickly as possible. It'll start out slowly and increase the tempo as we go along. This will help to simulate the actions of a battle, as y'all need to be able to make hand seals quickly and on the fly, to ensure y'all are able to counteract an opponent's attack, and catch them off guard. Blake nodded her agreement, understanding completely what he was telling her and shaking her hands to loosen them up. Alright then. Yuma. Inu. Tor. Hitsuji. Tori. He continued, keeping a careful watch on Blake's hand seals and their accuracy. He wasn't surprised to see she had a firm grasp on them, taking only a second or two to replicate the sign called. He upped the tempo, watching as she struggled for only a moment before finding the rhythm again. They continued on like this for a good 10 minutes, at which point they'd reached the speed one would need to maintain well in combat. To his surprise and admittedly his pride, Blake had managed to keep pace, faltering only a couple of times. By the end though, when he called for a rest, she was shaking her hands and flexing her fingers, showing just how sore they were. Memorization is only the first half. Building up strength in your fingers is the other, he said, reaching into a gym bag had brought with him to extract a small dual-handled device with padded grips. He tossed it over to her before explaining, "That will help you to build strength in your fingers. Use it in your off time and keep practicing your hand seals. Make sure you get it down to the point that it's almost instinctual." "I will, sensei," she said, ignoring the wince Naruto gave at being called that. "So, when are we going to unlock my chakra?" "Yay, about that," he said with a nervous chuckle. "You're not backing out of our deal, are you?" Blake asked in an annoyed tone. "You promised to teach me everything you know." "And I'm going to keep that promise," he said, hoping to placate her momentarily. "The problem is, I'm not exactly sure how to unlock your chakra, or if your people are even capable of producing chakra." "What, you mean like furnace?" she asked curiously. "No, I mean people in general," he clarified. "You see, where I'm from, you don't unlock chakra. You're born with it." He took a moment to explain the concept of chakra to her, how it was the merging of one's physical and spiritual energy, and how one could increase both. Blake listened intently, wishing she had brought something to keep notes with, and did her best to absorb everything she was being told. For the most part, it seemed a rather simple concept. The only problem was in the execution. Despite his best attempts to explain it to her, neither of them was certain of just how she was supposed to imitate the actions needed to perform the same feats he could. "Could you give me an example or show me something?" she asked. "What, like a demonstration?" he asked. "Yay, show me something that's unique to your people, and I'll try to imitate it," she replied. Naruto thought for a moment, finding Blake's suggestion to be rather good. The only problem was thinking of something that would be impressive enough. He considered his own staple of shadow clones, but, given her semblance, he decided that won't do. The tree climbing technique was also better suited for outside. Recalling his time spent with his team, however, he was inspired by something had seen Sasuke do and knew what he was going to show her. "Alright, step back. This is going to be big." Blake obeyed, giving Naruto some distance as he turned away from her and began making hand seals. "Me, snake, Hitsuji, sheepram, Saru, monkey, I, boar, Yume, horse, Tora, tiger," and keeping the chakra he used to a minimum, he expelled a massive fireball onto the training floor. While he was only using enough chakra to actually perform the technique, the fireball was still massive in size, and burned hot enough to cause the temperature of the room to increase a good deal. After a few seconds, he released it, and the fireball died away instantly, leaving the air around them feeling considerably drier as a result, as well as a leaving charcoal black mark on the ground. "That's the fireball technique," he announced, turning to look at Blake before leaping back in surprise. "That was awesome," she squealed, closing the distance between them in an instant as she gazed up at him in admiration. "Teach me how to do that," she demanded, fangirling just a bit. Blake, I'm not sure." "Please," she begged. Fine, he said reluctantly, as he showed her the hand seals. "Now you need to concentrate. Focus your chakra from your gut and only give it enough to create the fireball. It's just like any fire. It needs fuel, and how much is fed will determine how big and powerful it is. Give it too little and it won't ignite. Give it too much and you're liable to burn the training room to the ground with us still inside." "Right, don't overdo it," she replied, taking a ready stance. Under her breath, he heard he say, "I can't wait to use this in our next training spare." He winced at that, taking a moment to consider the consequences before silently issuing a prayer to any gods within hearing, asking them to make sure she failed to produce a flame. He knew that, as her sensei, he should wish for her failure, but, considering he was teaching her something that could possibly kill someone, he figured he would be forgiven. Not only that, but he was sure Miss Goodwitch would appreciate not having to explain to another student's parents how their child had been turned into the human equivalent of fried chicken by Blake Belladonna during a sparring match. As he silently contemplated stepping in to prevent her attempt, Blake quickly made the hand seals, contorted the muscles around her stomach, and expelled all the energy she could muster. As expected, nothing came out. Well, that wasn't entirely accurate. Something did come out in the form of a noise that sounded vaguely like a wet fat. It was a full minute before Blake finally gave up and they were thrown into silence. No one said anything. Slowly, embarrassment written all over her face, Blake turned to regard Naruto with a sheepish look. It was quickly replaced with a glare as she saw Naruto holding a hand over his mouth in a futile effort to hold back a flood of laughter that threatened to spill forth. "Don't you dare," she began. "Ahahaha." The floodgates burst and all at once the silence was filled with laughter. Blake's eyebrow twitched in annoyance, glaring holes into Naruto's head as she waited for him to stop laughing, her ears flat against her skull. It was a while before that happened as Head had to take a moment to sit down and risk falling over and on his ass. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh," he admitted. "I know I failed, but you didn't need to laugh at me," she pouted. "I'm sorry, I wasn't laughing at your attempt." "Well, I was, but more so at the noise you were making towards the end." "What was that about anyway?" "It's nothing," she growled. "Blake, come on, tell me," he prodded. I thought I was doing something wrong. Nothing was coming out, so I thought I needed to give it some more oomph." "I see," he said, wiping the tears from his eyes. "Why don't we take a break?" he said, motioning to the benches nearby. They sat for a moment, taking a few sips from the waters they'd brought with them. While the internal thermostats had corrected the atmosphere of the training room to return to normal after Naruto's little demonstration, it hadn't helped with their parched throats after breathing in that dry air for a while. Blake was unusually quiet. Unusual as, for the entire time they'd been training, she'd been eager to learn and asked non-stop questions whenever she had the chance. It was obvious what was bothering her and, while he wanted to tackle the problem head-on, he knew it would be better to wait for her to speak and open up first. "How are you able to do it?" she finally asked. "What do you mean? How were you able to produce that fireball so easily when all I could manage was to make a complete fool of myself?" she complained. "I know I've been fangirling and using this training as something of an excuse to play out some of my own personal fantasies, but when I saw you produce it so easily, I honestly started to think I might be able to do it too. Then I failed." "You didn't fail, Blake. Truth is there was no guarantee you would have been able to do it." "Thanks, I feel so much better," she said in a sardonic tone. "What I mean is, I would have been surprised had anyone been able to do what I just did. As far as I know, I'm a unique entity, which means there's nothing to say that anyone aside from myself can or can't produce ninjutsu just like I did. Honestly, with your level of devotion and determination, you would be running circles around me back home." "No, I won't," she argued. "You produced that massive fireball like it was nothing." "Yay, because I spent years training and honing my skills just to be able to do that. One of my former teammates, Uchiha Sasuke, was able to produce the same results at half my age." She stared at him in disbelief, her eyes searching his expression for anything that might denote he was lying to her. When she found nothing, she slowly began to realize that he was being honest with her. "You can't be serious," she said, a part of her still holding on to that disbelief. "I am. Here, my skills put me a cut above the rest. They allow me to stand toe-to-toe with someone like Pyrrha and ensure I come out on top with ease. Back home, though, I was anything but. I was no one of any worth to my people. I even failed to graduate from the academy on my first attempt." "You what?" she asked, her disbelief resurfacing. "It's the truth," he replied. "While the rest of my peers had graduated and were being sorted into their teams, I was left behind. Had to retake the year. Honestly, no one expected me to become a shinobi. Well, except for Iruka-sensei." "Was he?" "He was one of my teachers and one of the few people I knew who truly believed in me," he said, a warm smile crossing his face as he remembered his mentor. "He encouraged me and helped me graduate. He even routed for me when everyone else thought I should fail. He was one of the people to make a real difference in my life, enough for me to keep pushing forward when it seemed like all I would ever do was fail." "He sounds like a wonderful person," Blake said, her own thoughts drifting back to someone in her life sitting hundreds of miles across the sea. "He is. I hope you all can meet him someday. Speaking of, why don't we call it a day? We'll try again tomorrow." Blake agreed, picking up her belongings and following her team leader out the door. While today had been a bust, she had at least learned a few things. Even as she found she couldn't do the same things Naruto could, the fact that had come from a similar background to her own made her appreciate him a little bit more, especially with all the time he was taking to teach what he knew. All in all, he was quickly becoming one of the few humans in her life to whom she truly felt a kinship, something which she'd never thought she'd admit to herself. "So, how was training this morning? You two get in a good workout?" The question, while innocent enough, was anything but when considering that it came from Yang, complete with a devilish grin and wiggling eyebrows. It was obvious what she was alluding to, and Blake's sullen silence was enough to tell him that her questions were bothering her more than they should have. Despite his reassurances, Blake was determined to perform the same techniques that he had shown her. Time and time again she'd tried and failed to accomplish the most basic of ninjutsu. While this was something had expected to happen and had been quick to reassure her regardless, she was still frustrated with her overall failure, and had only agreed to take some time to rest and refuel, in preparation for continued training later that evening. There was also the obvious fact that he needed to answer Yang's question, however childish it might be. Silence wouldn't suffice. Having lived with Raven's people for a time, had long since learned that silence to questions like this often meant the same thing as admitting to their assumed answer. He also knew that she was hoping for a blatant denial, one more akin to something John Ark would manage, as he struggled to maintain his calm, only to have his stuttering betray him. Naturally, Naruto had long since overcome such drawbacks, and was more than prepared for Yang's goading attitude. "We were just doing some doubles training. Blake and I have a similar fighting style, and I wanted to see how much of what we were taught was similar, and how much was different." "That does make some sense," Weiss said, capitalizing on Yang's sullen silence when her questions failed to receive their desired outcome. "Although, from what I've seen, you're a fairly straightforward fighter given that you use a sword." "True, though I had to alter my style when I began using it. Originally, I was taught something much more subtle." "As in what exactly?" "Espionage and subterfuge," he replied. The table was silent for a moment. Each of the girls gave him a quizzical look aside from Blake, who had already been informed of some of his past life. It was a few moments longer before Ruby had gathered the courage to speak. "So you're like a spy." "That is one word for it." The main title we used to describe ourselves was shinobi. More quizzical and confused looks, enough so that he sighed, massaging his temple as he prepared himself for the unwanted but unavoidable reaction that was to come. We were ninjas, he said. Silence once more. This time, though, he was greeted by looks of disbelief. No one, aside from Blake, was willing to take his confession seriously. However, as the minutes ticked by and his serious expression continued to remain resolute, it slowly dawned on them that he wasn't joking. You were raised as a ninja? Yang finally asked. We call ourselves shinobi, but yes, ninja is also an appropriate term. As in wearing all black, wielding swords and knives, having epic fights on rooftops with the full moon in the background. Combat only occurs when something goes terribly wrong. Most of our missions were centered on information gathering, the spread of misinformation, espionage, subterfuge, and the occasional assassination. This all sounds a little far-fetched, Weiss admitted. It's really not. Most villages like mine are overshadowed by the huntsmen, crime syndicates, and various bandit tribes that cover the continent. While our expertise hasn't seen much use in the last few decades, we still pass our teachings to each new generation. They are serious, Weiss said, slowly starting to come to terms with what he was explaining to them all. Of course. I told Professor Ozpin the same thing. At this point, he began recounting his conversation with the headmaster just after the incident at the docks. He had recounted a short clipped version of the conversation had with the headmaster and Miss Goodwitch before, but he hadn't gone into detail about everything had disclosed to them. This time he disclosed everything, repeating as best he could word for word of their conversation. Their disbelieving looks soon evolved into raised eyebrows as he spoke of his childhood, the harsh ostracization had received from the villagers to the eventual formation of Team 7, and his confrontation with Zabuza. He left out much of the details regarding the use of their jutsu for obvious reasons, and focused mainly on their hand-to-hand capabilities. When he was finished, he waited patiently for them to speak. So you were really raised to be a ninja? Yang finally asked. Yes, as are most of the children in my village. I don't understand. If a village like yours really exists, why have I never heard of them? Weiss asked. The whole point of our existence is concealment. If people knew about us, chances are they would have eventually tried to kill us before we became a threat. We were used for assassinations, after all. It was only a matter of time before someone destroyed us before we were hired to destroy them. And there are more villages like yours? Ruby asked, her evident excitement at the prospect of having a ninja for a partner beginning to show. Yes, we're aware of others. We've even formed mutual pacts of non-aggression to prevent us from having an all-out war. Zabuza was originally from a rival village. What were they called? Weiss inquired. The village hidden in the mist, he said, and, noticing their disbelieving looks, he added, it's also known as the village of the bloody mist. I know I'm going to regret asking this, but why were they called that? Weiss asked. In the past, in order for their children to become shinobi, they had to be blooded. That meant they had to kill and, as part of their graduation exam, they were pitted against one another in 1v1 deathmatches. The survivors were given the title of shinobi. That's horrible. Weiss squawked, her mortified expression being mirrored by her teammates. And they still practice this? No, Zabuza was the one who caused them to stop the practice. Cause? I'm guessing you don't mean through legal means, Blake replied. No, when he was a child he killed at least 100 of his fellow students during his exam. From what I'm told it would have comprised the entirety of his graduating class. It was such a horrifying display that they stopped performing the act completely. No kidding, Yang breathed, shivering in disgust at the mere thought of what it must have been like. Did your village practice something like that? She asked cautiously. No, we never did anything like that, he replied, smiling when they breathed a collective sigh of relief. Our exam was more a test of our ability to successfully disguise ourselves as one of our instructors. If we could pass ourselves off as them almost flawlessly, then we were able to graduate. Were you graded on just your disguise or was there more? Weiss asked, curious about the details. It also encompassed our ability to mimic their mannerisms, their speech, even the way they walked and handled themselves. Much of what people don't take into account is that, in order to perfectly pass yourself off as another person, you have to account for smaller details that typically fly under the radar, things that only their close friends or family members would take notice of. It shows our overall attention to detail as well as our information gathering. The more accurate our disguise, the greater chance of success of passing ourselves off as them and completing our mission. A fair point, Weiss agreed. That's so cool, Ruby said, literally vibrating with excitement. You're a real-life ninja. Like Blake, only better. Hey, the girl in question snapped in protest. Sh's not wrong, Yang pointed out. Ninjas are supposed to be stealthy, and your blunder destroyed the whole dockyard. I revealed myself on purpose, she argued. And look how well that worked out for you, Yang shot back. Aside from the obvious, Blake does have skills similar to mine, and we've been working on sharpening those, Naruto interjected before a fight could break out. I must admit there is some potential in learning those same skills. Blundering our way through everything can only get us so far. Learning more subtle tactics and ways of dismantling our enemies before they even know we're there could be very useful, Weiss must. Not sure how well espionage and subterfuge will work against Grimm, Yang pointed out. If recent events should have taught you anything, it would be that Grimm are not the only thing we'll have to contend with, Weiss countered. I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll be seeing the White Fang, and learning how to take them unawares could prove very useful for dismantling their operations. Are you suggesting we start targeting the Fang? Yang asked, surprised. Even Blake's ears perked up, an inquisitive look on her face. I'm merely pointing out the obvious. The White Fang have shown that they're willing to work with humans and well-known criminals no less. I won't be surprised if we find ourselves facing off against them in the future. I won't endorse us seeking them out, but taking the opportunity to add to our overall skill base could prove advantageous when the opportunity presents itself. That's something we'll need to consider moving forward with our team training, Naruto said. With the promise to his team that he would create a training regimen for them to start working on that incorporated his shinobi skills into their own, as well as the inevitable headache that would ensue from having to figure all of that out. He returned his attention to the headache of trying to convince Blake that it wasn't the end of the world, simply because she couldn't use chakra or perform the same techniques he could. It's just not fair, she moaned. Blake, calm down, he said. I just don't understand how someone can be born with chakra and others can't. I should be able to use it. If we can unlock ore, then we can figure out a way to unlock chakras. It's not the end of the world. Not every shinobi in my village is born with the ability to use chakra and they're able to get along just fine. Name one, she challenged. I can name two, actually, he said, much to her surprise. Rock Lee and his sensei Mike Guy. They called use chakra, Blake asked in a disbelieving tone. Neither of them could. In fact, if I remember correctly, Guy sensei's father also couldn't. He developed a fighting style that Guy taught to Lee, which is how they're able to be shinobi. How do you mean? The main thing to understand is that jutsu is divided into 3 different categories: ninjutsu, jinjutsu, and taijutsu. I know the first one, but what are the last 2? They're all fairly simple to understand. Ninjutsu is fairly broad, but is mostly considered to be anything that falls in line with needing the use of chakra, hand seals, or even weapons and tools to use. Basically, that fireball I performed earlier would fall into this category. Ninjutsu is a bit different in that it focuses on the manipulation of the mind and your 5 senses. It's the ability to override and trick them into believing that an illusion you've cast on them is real. It could be anything from seeing someone who isn't there to being put through intense torture. That sounds horrible, Blake said. It is. It's often utilized in breaking prisoners or taking out opponents from a distance. Being able to make your opponent think you've ripped their eyes out and rendered them blind can be very useful, especially when you don't even have to touch them to do it. Is there a way around it? The mental strength of the jinjutsu usually depends on both the person performing it and the victim themselves. Some people are able to break out of them easily enough, but some have more trouble. Causing yourself pain is a common method of breaking the illusion, though this isn't always guaranteed to work. The last and most straightforward is taijutsu. It's basically our fighting techniques, some of which can be supplemented or strengthened using chakra. Most of that is something I can teach. It's what Lee was taught and became a master of. He was even able to open up his chakra gates. His what now? Blake asked, confused. Do you mean pressure points or something like that? No. Basically, there are 8 chakra gates found all throughout the body. The gate of opening, healing, life, pain, limit, view, wonder, and death. They're what maintains a healthy flow of chakra all throughout the body. Unlocking these allows you to greatly increase the overall flow of chakra, and greatly increase your body's speed, endurance, and strength. Unfortunately, it also leaves you in a vulnerable state afterward. I don't understand. You said Lee could use chakra, but he can open these gates. How does it even work? He can't manipulate his chakra to use ninjutsu or jinjutsu. He can unlock the gates to increase his overall physical ability. Think of it like the limiters in your brain. You know what I mean. Yay, a mother lifting a car off her baby or something like that. More or less the same, yes. Lee was able to open up 6 of the 8 gates, making him incredibly powerful. I saw him in action once. He was moving so fast it was almost impossible to see him. Moving fast like Ruby. Faster, he said, smirking when Blake's jaw dropped. That's incredible. I bet he was impossible to defeat. Not exactly, he confessed. His opponent managed to find an opening and broke one of his arms and legs. It was rather traumatic. Oh, she said, deflating a little. What happens if you open all 8 gates? Well, from what Im told you, achieve near godlike strength and power. Really? Before dying a short time later after your heart explodes from being pushed beyond its physical limits and immense dehydration, after you sweat all the fluid from your body. Your skin has a tendency to turn red simply from the fact that your blood is boiling through your skin. Blake's jaw smashed into the ground at this point. Her initial thought that Naruto might be lying to her was completely overridden by the fact that had already showcased his ability to use jutsu, giving credence to the fact that he very well may be telling her the truth. How? She asked. How has no one discovered you after all of this? We probably just said it was a semblance, and no one questioned it, he replied. Honestly, claiming that our ninjutsu and jinjutsu are just semblances was probably how we managed to stay hidden for so long. Yay, that makes sense, she said. Regardless, I've been wondering something for a while now. What might that be? Did you ever stop and think that maybe your people do have chakra? What do you mean? Well, this is more so a theory I've had since this morning, but I haven't noticed a significant change in my aura meter when it was unlocked. What was initially registering my chakra and is now registering my aura has shown no change in my overall amount or even an error code. Do you think it's possible that the aura of your world is possibly the chakra of mine? Blake stopped to consider the question for a moment. In a strange way, it did make some sense. The powers and abilities of huntsmen and huntresses made them seem otherworldly, especially when you brought semblances into the mix. What's more, while it was easy enough for Naruto to mask his techniques as a form of semblance here, what's to say that it won't work in reverse? Have you done anything to test it out? Not yet. I didn't notice anything when I used my technique earlier, but I figured it was something we could go over tomorrow. Yay, that would be interesting, especially if it opens up a new avenue of abilities for you. I also have a question regarding your semblance. Alright. Apart from being able to create a clone of yourself, is it capable of anything beyond that? Well, if I use dust, then I'm able to use it in tandem with my clones. Basically, I can generate clones made out of rock or ice, and even cause them to explode with fire dust. Are you able to learn through them? I'm not sure what you mean, she replied. Here, let me show you. Taking a step back, Naruto made a hand sign and generated a perfect clone copy of himself. The clone waved at her, and she awkwardly waved back. There was something altogether impressive and creepy about seeing a mirror image of her team leader appear out of thin air. One of the advantages to using the Shadow Clone Jutsu is that you are able to learn from them. Anything they experience is shared with their creator upon their destruction or dismissal. In essence, I'm able to train and master techniques by generating and using my clones to train in the same fashion alongside me. It's basically a way to cheat the system. It only works with things such as jutsu. I can't have them all read different subjects and then learn everything all at once or go to the gym and have each of them performing different exercises. Due to the fact that they are, in essence, made of chakra, then their ability to use and manipulate chakra extends to me and vice versa. Any technique I learn and master, they are capable of performing themselves just as any work they put into mastering a new jutsu is ultimately reaped by me. That's so cool and convenient, Blake pointed out. It does have its benefits, he replied. I figured, with a semblance like yours, you might have a similar ability. Unfortunately, no. Mine doesn't work that way. It only leaves a temporary copy of myself for others to deal with while I escape. I'm unable to manipulate them in any way beyond acting as a substitute. Still fairly useful, he pointed out. Naruto stood off to the side, watching attentively as Blake went through the various hand signs, slowly but surely training her hands to get used to their awkward movements and positions. She was dedicated, had give her that, but ultimately she had no hope of performing the same ninjutsu techniques that he was capable of performing, nor did anyone else for that matter. They are absolutely sure of this? Naruto asked, his question directed to Kurama. You think he'd lie to you about that? Tailed beast stats made entirely out of chakra. Being able to sense it in other beings is as simple as breathing for you creatures. No, so far I've not sensed anything from anyone we've met in this world. Raven and Ozpin stand out, but not because they have chakra. I sense something different in them, somehow the same but also unique to their person. It's difficult to explain. Yay, I understand. How about the aura meter? Are you still manipulating it to show my chakra? No, given that your aura was unlocked, I felt the need to keep up appearances was no longer needed. It should register your aura only. We can still use chakra, but it advised that we use it only when needed. I'm not sure how much can be explained by these people and their otherworldly abilities. That's fair. At least it gives us one less thing to worry about. I do have one other question. What's that? When we're successful in returning to our world, what are you going to tell them? They are worried about their well-being. Color me impressed Kurama. I never thought Yao'd have a soft spot for these girls. Don't mock me, boy, Kurama growled. I mean, given the creative way in which Yao've begun incorporating your own history into your backstory for this world, I can't help but wonder how they'll react when they come to know the truth. They're going to have a lot of questions and I can't imagine them simply allowing you to depart without giving them some answers. They'll deal with that when the time comes, Naruto replied. I'm not exactly lying to them. Twisting the truth a little, for sure, but it isn't exactly lying when most of what I've told them is based on true events. We'll just take things one day at a time and figure out how to explain my departure to them when the time comes. As you say. I just hope you know what you're doing, Naruto. So do I. Thanks for watching.